Hello, everyone, and welcome back to what I have chosen to call a history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll. You may call it what you like. I've been away such a long time, and I'm glad to be back in it. I think this is a good, proper return to form, if there ever was one to return to. Portions of it are probably going to sound clumsy. I've been chipping away at it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I know there's a couple spots that I may have misspoken, but I catch myself and call it out. A couple times I refer to Stephen Blush, the author of American Hardcore, as Stephen Rosen. I catch that later and correct it. I might give the same anecdote about a James Hetfield interview in Rolling Stone, but it's very short twice. Promise it's short, at least shorter the second time if it is the second time. But it's felt good to sort of get back on the old horse. I missed doing it, but I did definitely. I just hit a wall after 4 years. Yeah, 4.5 years of doing it. Hi, everyone. This is Jay from the future. I've come back to finish editing the episode and revisit the intro that I recorded last week, and I got very bored listening to my stupid voice. And I thought, this is no way to welcome people back after a long absence. So instead of editing it out or trimming it down, I decided to do something infinitely lazier, which is just record over it and read you your horoscope. And now, today's horoscope, since I'm not doing every astrological sign at once, God no, today's horoscope is for Virgo. Financial matters come to a head this weekend when you're caught stealing furniture from City Hall. Beware of a stranger who wants to share stories with you about a dog show you both once attended, wherein you bought from them a bejeweled dog collar that just happened to contain a celestial tracking device. Now, your lucky Greek yogurt flavor to bear in mind this week is kimchi caramel, and your lucky mispronunciation of a cherished film favorite is Alice's Acupunctures in Wonderland. Don't forget that now. Now, that was only for the Virgos in the audience, so I hope the rest of you had your ears I don't make any promises about the regularity of me updating Patreon. I'm just going to keep the fee at $1 a month. If you want to let it go and contribute that to my pockets, that basically goes to pay for my one other Patreon subscription, which is my favorite podcast, Decoding the Gurus, which is a fun science and current events oriented podcast, let's say, with a psychologist and an anthropologist debunking or breaking down a lot of bullshit. And that's fun for me. And my Patreon subscribers basically pay for that $3 a month. The bill. That's something I do appreciate. Anyhow, welcome to the show for the first time if you're new. What I tend to do is pick a movie that has some connections to some artists or bands and then get into the history of everything involved as much as I feel like it in whatever directions seem interesting. Today I've chosen Dead Kennedys, SLAYER, and Minor Threat to couple up with the film Green Room. Came out about 10 years ago. And I have to say it was a pretty wonderful film. I was taken aback by some of the brutality in a good way. A little bit surprised at a couple of there's a goofy moment or two with the violence that I don't know if I really appreciated. It seemed like a bit of a gag, a well-timed. I don't know. There's a couple of sort of well-timed sort of gags, violence-wise. For the most part, the violence is pretty brutal and impactful. It wasn't what I thought. I had asked people for good revenge films to check out, and this one kept getting brought up as a good, like, Nazi killing revenge film. And I don't think that's what it is at all. I think it's a very, it's much deeper. It's not a cool like cathartic revenge, rampage movie, which is what I was actually in the mood for when I was looking up stuff. But I also tried sitting through the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. So far, I'm only halfway through, and I just don't really care about anything that's happening or anyone all that much yet either. Maybe I'm just getting old and I have less time to allow before I move on to something that I know is going to be more satisfying. Anyway, I also, everyone looks to make a big point about Patrick Stewart being in Green Room as the main, villain. He's just a sort of a soft-spoken older guy that walks around in wool flannel and glasses and says some racist stuff. He's not like, it's not like unthinkable that this old actor that's been a professional his whole life can't pull this off. He just walks around and says a few lines. He's not like out there. He's not like shoving people's hands into blenders or anything.
That was from the
or torturing
Goonies.
people. He just shows up periodically and talks to some of the Nazis that are, working for him, and then walks away. He's good, but come on. Other thoughts? I don't know. The group of bands I chose to talk about was a result of the two main characters wearing their shirts, being Dead Kennedys and Minor Threat, and then SLAYER because I heard them in the soundtrack at one point in the movie. They're mentioned in an interview with the filmmaker, and I always thought it was cool that Jeff Hanneman of SLAYER had a Dead Kennedys sticker on his #1 guitar, his Jackson, that he played most of his career as his main go-to instrument on stage.
Just like SLAYER.
I don't know. It's enough of a connection for me. And there's some other connections too, because, Nazis like SLAYER. I don't like that. I don't particularly love that, but it's a thing. I'll get more into that later, much later in this episode. Thank you for being here. Thank you for checking out something new and different and weird. There's no real other format other than the fact that, I just bounce in and out of each topic as at a regular pace and is as even a way as I can break it all up between talking about Minor Threat, SLAYER, Dead Kennedys, and the film. There's triple the music to the ratio of movie talk in this episode. That's not always the case on every episode, but usually I only have one artist that I'm talking about compared to one movie. So that's how it goes.
Is it?
But thanks again for being here. I'm going to lead into the first segment in a second. Before mentioning, I'm just maybe a bit flustered and nervous right now.
Just go.
I got like 4.5 hours to kill before I head into Seattle and open an Aussie tribute show.
Oh, are you?
It's a charity show for Parkinson's Foundation.
Is it?
That's sort of a nationwide network of places, and I get to sing and play harmonica on the Wizard, and then sing "Mama, I'm Coming Home" with some friends.
Who will let this happen?
And then a bunch of other bands are playing after that.
Oh,
right after me on stage will be the five-time ex-girlfriend.
If you haven't heard about them, it's really not that interesting
episodes of this show a couple of
anyway,
times,
but it's
or
come
on
up
the
a couple
Patreon
of
maybe.
times in
I don't
the
know.
past.
I don't go into the identity or the details about the person, but it is funny that this keeps happening because we're both musicians. And I don't know how I'm going to feel about that. I'm either going to bail right away, or I'm going to watch their performance of Over the Mountain. No, not Over the Mountain. It's
be precise.
might be Mr. Crowley or Over the Mountain. Then they're doing Perry Mason,
Who cares?
which is awesome.
No one cares.
Anyhow, I
What
forget,
about me?
What else I was going to say? Oh, Radish Mattress. We have sponsorship from Radish Mattress as always.
Damn right.
You'll hear from their spokespeople later on.
You are.
Maybe I'll see how the concert goes. The gig goes tonight, and I'll update. I'll update during the outro of the show. Perhaps we'll see.
Yeah, you better. Because everyone's so interested. Like they are interested in a good night's sleep, and that's why they want a Radish mattress. That's right, Jay can't hear me. but you can. And do you know the importance of a good night's sleep on an all-organic vegetable mattress? Check out one in a local storefront showroom in your area today. What else are you doing? Get yourself on the bus or in your car and listen to the rest of this episode on your way to buy a radish mattress. Let's learn about Minor Threat now, shall we? Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay, let's talk some Minor Threat. Specifically, a lot of this narrative will come straight from Ian MacKaye, the founder of the band, and I'm first going to draw from the book Our Band Could Be Your Life by Michael Azerrad, and I'm going to start a little farther in the past when MacKaye had got a band going called the Teen Idols, ideally, yes. Talking about, the early days of the Teen Idols, he said they were trying to get away from really corrupted music, Basically, your heavy metal bands that were into heroin, cocaine, just a lot of drinking. We drank a lot of Coke and ate a lot of Twinkies. When I became a punk, my main fight was against the people who were around me. Friends, said MacKaye in the essential 1983 hardcore documentary, Another State of Mind. I said, God, I don't want to be like these people, man. I don't fit in at all with them. So it was an alternative. The author then says, at the time, the major labels were in the midst of co-opting punk rock by dressing it in skinny ties and modish haircuts, virtually willing a trend called New Wave into existence. For my own perspective, retroactively, historically, I feel that is not super relevant to like the DC hardcore scene or the New York or the LA hardcore scenes or any hardcore scene, but more along the lines of punk bands like the Ramones, the CBGB's era bands maybe that also came up in the late 70s, the ones that, still were playing slow enough that you could co-opt it into new wave. Or they might have a synthesizer in the band. Or, the skinny ties and labor-intensive hairdos were definitely a thing that was available to marketers that wanted to take a band with a punk attitude or punk leanings and a more of an individualistic bent, maybe, than the ones that came up during the time we're talking about now. Like that, really, really fast, really aggressive, hardcore punk is not the kind of thing that's going to get co-opted. And the author's not saying that, obviously, or anything. I'm just interjecting for the sake of, more context. It's not, I don't like the hanging implication there that, I don't know if he's about, in case someone wants to think, the folks in the Teen Idols or Minor Threat could have easily gone that route if they wanted to. Or they could have been lured away from their ideals by the promise of that kind of money, and I don't really think that's the case. But if your punk band was really influenced by the modern sounds of the Clash's later work, yes, you could be turned new wave and make more money, probably. Many fans bought in, says the author, as did plenty of bands pushing punk back to the margins. Vanguard punks like The Clash and The Damned were losing their edge so quickly that by 1980, Strajic would holler in the Teen Idols' fleeting fury. The clothes you wear have lost their sting, so it's the fury in the songs that you sing. To resuscitate that precious fury, the Teen Idols tried to look as daunting as possible, sporting shaved heads, mohawks, and various other punk gear. Nelson and MacKaye would even pound nails and tacks into the soles of their boots so they'd make an ominous clacking sound. I remember going to the dentist at one point. I had these round upholstery tacks on the bottoms of my boots. Nelson recalls with a chuckle. And there was a marble lobby in the office building and a big door at the end, and I couldn't even pull it open because when I'd pull on it, I'd just slide toward the door. I couldn't get in. They also took to wearing chains on their boots so they'd rattle as they walked down the street. The idea was to intimidate the jocks and rednecks who had started to hassle them for looking different. But the tough guy look couldn't have been further from the truth. In our shows and within our own community, we were just totally goofy guys, says Mackay. We were painfully honest. We didn't shoplift. We didn't vandalize. We didn't spray paint. We were just good kids. That was our whole joke. We didn't do anything. Everyone hates us because of the way we look. But the look backfired, drawing even more altercations than before. It was a great way to learn about how much hatred really exists in this world, says Mackay. If you do something so dumb as spray paint your hair, the next thing you know, you have grits from Southern Maryland chasing you down the fucking street because you chose to do something a little different. You realize how fucked up our society is. They ended up taking more of their cues from West Coast punk as opposed to the older and more, as the author says, debauched punk from New York City. They resented the fact that everybody said you couldn't be a punk if you didn't live in New York. What did being punk have to do with geography? Besides, no one was more punk than California bands like the Dead Kennedys. By that time, New York bands such as Mars and DNA had developed their own powerful reaction against New Wave, called No Wave, and the music was far more radical than the jacked-up punk rock of the West Coast bands. But after going up to New York to check out the scene, Mackay and his crew weren't having any of it. No Wave, says Mackay, was artier and druggier and didn't really speak to us. Plus, they were snobby to us because we were just little kids. He and his buddies devoured West Coast fanzines like Damage, Slash, and Search and Destroy, eager for any shred of information about California punk. They grew to love the Germs, the bands on the Danger House label, especially Black Flag. That Black Flag single was life-changing for us, Mackay says. Nervous Breakdown, one of the greatest records ever released, in my opinion. And some of you may already know, Mackay was best friends, still is best friends, with a young Henry Rollins at that time, who would go on to become the lead singer in Black Flag eventually. Lots of mutual respect between those two guys, and someday I'm going to get into Black Flag deeper for another episode. I haven't decided what kind of movie to sort of pin it on, but boy oh boy, do I have at least 35 bookmarks in an old copy of Henry Rollins' Get in the Van that I started sticking in there probably 3 years ago when I was planning for a Black Flag episode that I still haven't done yet. Stay with me, please. Now, I recently, a couple years ago, saw a great YouTube documentary on if you want to look up the phrase like Chinatown punk wars in LA, something to that effect. It sounds more dramatic than it is. It was a competitive sort of standoff between two not neighboring but nearby Chinese restaurants that also hosted all ages punk shows in the early hardcore era of LA, and a lot of cool stories from the bands that played. And they tried to stay loyal to one business owner or the other in the hopes of maintaining their own sort of foothold on their local scene, where they, couldn't really get booked in other clubs yet. It was pretty cool. So to that point, the Teen Idols go to California in early August of 1980, and they learned the difference there between being a punk in D.C. and being a punk in Los Angeles. When they arrived in the L.A. bus station, a cop, wary of violence-prone punks, hassled the Teen Idols, calling them faggot and clown. In retaliation, Nelson grabbed his ass at the cop, who promptly handcuffed him for an hour. They were supposed to open for the Dead Kennedys and the Circle Jerks at LA's Hong Kong Cafe, but the club owner dropped them from the bill when he saw how young they were. They had to settle for playing the next night, opening for the Notorious Mentors in an outfit known as Puke, Spit, and Guts. So I guess I think earlier maybe I misspoke when I said all ages shows. I thought the restaurants had all ages gigs as well as over 21 gigs from time to time. I don't want to go on the record definitively saying the wrong thing, but clearly the show that the Teen Idols were going to play required them to be a little bit older. The Idols made an impression. People were freaked out at how fast we were, Mackay says. They could not believe it. On the other hand, the band could not believe their paycheck, $15. When they played San Francisco's fabled punk bastion Mubahe Gardens, making a grand total of $11. They met up with a bunch of badass LA punks with names like Mugger of the SST posse, Drew Blood, and Critter. They were terrifying, and they just beat up anybody who crossed them. The guy says, still a bit odd. For the teen idols who were constantly harassed for being punks back home, it was an empowering encounter. We brought that home, Sullivan says. I don't think we'd been home 3 days before we were walking down M Street or something, and somebody says, hey, fag, and 6 light bulbs went on over 6 little heads, and 6 little guys trounced somebody. And it was a very powerful feeling. I don't know if you've ever experienced a carload of hillbillies going by and yelling faggot at you or getting beat up by Marines at Georgetown, says Mackay. But there's something so satisfying about someone yelling something at you as they go by and then racing after their car and dragging them out of the car at a red light. And seeing those guys do that stuff made us feel like we needed to defend. We needed to circle the wagons. We needed to fight back. Fighting also proved to be an effective way of separating the wheat from the chaff, punk-wise. We were trying to stand out. And one way it seemed at the time was violence, said Mackay. Violence was one way to ratchet it up, make it too unpleasant to people who weren't really down. I had intellectualized violence quite a bit, Mackay continues. I had a philosophy of violence, which was that I bruised the ego. That was my theory. I fought a lot, but I never maimed people. I was not a cruel fighter. My concept was that I would never back down from a fight. I would just come at people. The idea was to break their will. I didn't want to hurt nobody. I really didn't want to hurt nobody. All I really wanted to do was tell them not to hurt me and not let them have the sense that they were going to dominate us. When Black Flag first played DC at a club called the Bayou, the owner installed 3 extra stage bouncers for the occasion. They made the night so fun for us, man, Mackay bragged to Forced Exposure. I assume that's a magazine. I'm talking these motherfuckers were leaving blood pouring. Because it's good. To me, that's justified aggression. I believe in that. I'm an aggressive person. Now I'll leave off this segment with the end of the Teen Idols and the origins of Minor Threat. They played their last show on November 6, 1980, and they were opening for a band called SVT, which had been created by former Jefferson Airplane bassist Jack Cassidy. They were playing a club called the 930 Club, and it was a big deal, I guess, for all ages shows in the area. Washington, D.C. had this law that would exclude you from bars if you're a minor. Well, yeah, lots of us grew up that way. That's not, but I understand. Like, yes, that's what bars are, right? But here's the thing. There's also another law that says any establishment that sold alcohol must also sell food, which also technically makes it a restaurant, and minors can't be barred from restaurants. That doesn't work out here in Washington State. I don't know what the state-to-state sort of take on that little separation is, but yeah, if a bar is a bar and you can't go in if you're underage, or I mean, not legally, especially after certain hours. I think you have to do certain things here in Washington. If you want an all ages show in a drinking establishment, you have to have ropes and special areas like cut off, and adults can't take drinks into the area where the minors are, but it can happen. It can work. So, the risk of being prosecuted for barring a minor from a restaurant was far smaller than the risk of being fined for serving alcohol to a minor, so minors didn't get into rock shows. Ian Mackay and his friends would stand outside the clubs and try to hear the now legendary punk bands like The Damned and Stiff Little Fingers as they played inside, a frustrating experience they would never forgive or forget. These are the words, again, of Michael Azerrad. But at the Mubahay Gardens in San Francisco, the teen idols were allowed in once they got big X's drawn on their hands, signaling they were underage. This is the origin of the whole straight edge thing. They suggested this to the 930 management, vowing that if any underage punks were caught drinking, the club could just ban them all forever. The 930 Club opened its doors. Right after the final Teen Idol show, Mackay and Nilsson brainstormed ideas for their next band on a long drive up to Colgate University in upstate New York, where Mark Sullivan was enrolled. By the time they got back, it was decided the band was going to be called Minor Threat. The name was disingenuous. We were minors, underage, and also just diminutive, says the 5'7" Ian Mackay. Just a small threat. Nothing to worry about. They also agreed that Mackay would be the singer. I just had an idea of how one might sing. He says, I watched Woodstock 16 times, watched Joe Cocker. I wanted to be the singer. Straight edge folks would just
bump the mic.
Write the X's on their hands,
Did
on
they?
the back of their hands, like you would get a hand stamp for going into a club.
What's a club?
You know, the bouncers or whoever taking tickets would put that X on your hands to show that you're a minor and you can't be served alcohol. What that eventually became was teenage kids and older punks just drawing an X on the back of their hands when they were going to school or hanging out at the mall or doing whatever they were doing socially to sort of be a virtue signal, not using that in a derogatory way.
Oh, no.
A signal to other people that they are not drug users and they are not alcohol users.
Well, that was educational as all heck. Wow. I feel so educated. But you know what I'd rather feel? I'd rather feel well rested. If only I had a mattress made out of organic, non-GMO radishes to sleep on. Oh wait, I do! I was lying this whole time. That's advertising for you. That's marketing in a nutshell. I'll just say it. No, I slept great last night because I slept on a radish mattress. Shouldn't you? Come on. If you haven't tried one yet, just call 1-800-RADISH mattress for me. But the E's in me are 3s. And there's like 3 of them. We'll send you a free trial of a radish mattress. That'll last you at least 3 days before it needs to be repacked. Try it today. Now let's learn more fun stuff.
So, let's introduce ourselves a bit to the San Francisco punk scene.
Oh, I love that punk scene.
Kennedys are going to sprout up from. The book American Hardcore by Stephen Blesh is quite a resource when it comes to...
Oh, you got Stephen's name right this time.
The history of hardcore music in America. I have enjoyed it at various times throughout the making of this podcast.
You sound very committed.
First came in handy when I was doing the Misfits episodes, I think.
Oh, we all remember those.
I also marked some other spots that I wanted to get back to later.
And you did.
That I haven't been able to use yet. But for today,
sad.
I'm going to draw from the chapter Dead Kennedys in San Francisco, California, Uber alles. Zen fascists will control you 100% natural. You will jog for the master race. Always wear the happy face. That's from the California Uber alles.
Don't pretend you knew that before you read the
Dead
book.
Kennedys. Des Cadena from Black Flag opens up the chapter by saying Chuck Dukowski got reprimanded for spray painting Black Flag in pink because that's the only paint that he had. The cop said, next time use black. That was in San Francisco.
What a great quote.
Stephen Blesh points out that unlike, law and order centric LA, up in San Francisco, a place that was, originally settled by sailors, hookers, 49ers, Chinamen, and other riffraff, residents traditionally turned a blind eye to alternative lifestyles. That's why the Bay Area served as a fertile breeding ground for generations of subculture and subversion. The first American punk scene after New York arose in San Francisco. Things were going on there by early 76, at least a year before LA. San Francisco punk bands definitely equaled those in London or New York. They just didn't have the same infrastructure to propel them. The first SF outfits were Crime with Frankie Fix and the Nuns with a young Alejandro Escovedo. As they did in beatnik and hippie days, misfits and idealists flocked to San Francisco in the punk years, especially after the Sex Pistols played their final show at the Winterland, January 10th, 1978. That influx produced some of the best American punk. The Dills with Chip and Tony Kinman, leader of Rank and File. The Avengers with Penelope Houston. Negative Trend with Will Shatter and Steve DePace, leader of Flipper. And Pink Section. Graphic artist Winston Smith says, what I liked about that early punk scene in San Francisco was that there wasn't a star trip. It wasn't like, I'm a star, meet me backstage. It was a more casual atmosphere. It was the first time in a long time people actually tried to encourage each other. San Francisco is only 7 miles wide. It was a small community. The scene was played up in the media as violent and drug-infested, but that wasn't the essence of what was happening. The author gives credit to the Dead Kennedys for being the San Francisco band most responsible for making hardcore music happen nationwide. By identifying a nascent movement and nurturing it, they sought out like-minded artists and aided many unknown upstarts. In their zeal to establish a united scene, Dead Kennedys set the ground rules for everything hardcore since day one. Singer Jello Biafra was a powerful presence whose political insurgence and rabid fandom made him a father figure for the burgeoning subculture. A most inspirational force, Jello could also be a real prick. From inside and outside the scene, Biafra was singled out for criticism. In the end, Biafra was a visionary, incendiary motherfucker. He was born Eric Boucher in 1958. He came from Boulder, Colorado, I guess. And he was inspired by Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, and the Chicago 7. He went on at 18 to attend UC Santa Cruz. Jello says, Boulder was dominated by country rock snobs. Boo! That would be awful. It was great in the late 60s because in a town of 50,000, there were 20,000 hippies in the summer. This was back when long hair was dangerous. It was a great place to grow up. By the time I'd come of age, that scene wasn't there anymore. You couldn't even get good acid by the time I was getting out of high school. Worse yet, the spirit of the resistance was long gone. People were cutting their hair, putting on corduroy jackets with patches on the sleeves, opening businesses. This candle's made from all natural ingredients, therefore it's $50. Don't argue with me, man. It's not cool. Dope dealer mentality and lingo used in new ways to fuck over people drove both my anger and my serious depression before punk happened. Terms like new age and yuppie weren't invented yet, so I vented my attitude about Boulder in songs like Holiday in Cambodia, California Uber Alles, and Terminal Preppy. I got a lot of my grist for social satire from going back to Colorado. San Francisco is so damn safe. There's always shows to see, other artists to bounce ideas off of. If you're running out of ideas, take a BART train to the suburbs and see how everyone else lives. You'll remember what brought you here. The moniker Jello Biafra was, let's see, basically Jello, America's favorite dessert, and Biafra, the African region noted for civil war and famine. The blasphemous nature of Dead Kennedy's name spoke for itself. Dead Kennedys, he says, couldn't have gotten started anywhere but San Francisco. It was very hard to find places to play at first. The name alone prevented it in New York and Boston. So I guess their first gig was opening for the Offs and Negative Trend at the Mob, the club we spoke about earlier. July 19th, 1978. They created an immediate stir. And then fall 79, Biafra comes to national attention when he ran for mayor of San Francisco. In an astonishingly successful campaign, he received over 4% of the vote, running fourth place out of 10 candidates with 6,137 votes and helping force a runoff election, eventually won by the wretched Dianne Feinstein. God damn it. Joey Shithead from DOA says he met Biafra at Mabahay Gardens in 78. They played a couple successful nights there. He was hanging out with a bunch of beer he'd smuggled in. Security tried to take it away. So I shook one up and sprayed it in his face. 3 of them strong-armed me out the door, and Dirk Dirksen, promoter, said, "You're out of here, shithead. You're gone." Biafra got me back in, and we became friends after that. So to move into more conversation about all ages shows and how unusual they were at the time, Jello talks about the hell of their first New York tour. He realizes there's not a lot going on in mid-79 because all the venues are over 21, and as he says, all the fire is coming from people under 21, so they demanded all ages shows, and the music press dismissed it as a cheap gimmick. But then people who were coming to those shows grow up into dozens of bands in the next 5 years. He says he still gets letters from folks that say their first exposure to punk was a Dead Kennedys gig at Bonds in New York. He says, "That matinee show where we played horribly, it was way too early in the day for a show, but people loved it and figured, hey, I can do this too. I think I will." He was pretty well known for, supporting younger groups in every city they went to, when such interest by headliners was unheard of. He assembled the bills and made sure the promoters dealt properly with rowdy slam dancing crowds. Biafra understood that the bouncers were totally out of control and that in the worst problem at shows, kids would jump on stage to share the mic and get fucking drilled by security. He says, we learned that from our first tour. In Philadelphia, we had a metal band with Nazi armbands open for us because they were friends with the promoter. A mafiosi band did the same in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, because they provided a free PA and nearly beat everyone up after the show. We didn't want that to happen again. Some people from the artier side of the underground scene were upset with me for going with hardcore bands, especially in Boston. But I felt the vanguard was coming from those who had the most energy, pure and simple. Boston, in particular, tried to keep hardcore people out of the venues, and we tried to change that. Little did we know that some of those new people would act like the old Boston Guard within 2 years of being able to play. Now, I'm not sure who that's a reference to.
Nope.
But I'm sure the right audience does.
You're out of your depth, that's why.
A Boston promoter named Alec Peters says that when you did a show with Jell-O, he owned the stage, the whole area. We'd put a guy on either side of the stage. That's how we ran the pit. Those were the only people, and all they did was keep things clean and let the kids do their shit. Soon, Jell-O's band was so big that the big rock clubs started booking them because they were a legitimate draw. But he'd spend most of his time fucking browbeating the bouncers.
Wow, man. What a great place to stop. What a natural place to cut off the story. Good work. Good work. How about some Slayer?
Hello, welcome back to BBC Two and the history of Slayer. Did you know that their deal with Metal Blade CEO Brian Slagel was not a good deal. Apparently, they were locked into a management deal with him, as well as a recording deal, where he took the lion's share of the publishing money from them. I mean, I say took, and they willingly signed over with as any teenagers and early 20-somethings in a band did in the 80s and before and beyond naturally did. Because when there's no stakes, it's like, oh, you get half of the profits of things? Well, we're nobody right now. I mean, if you're going to make us money, then the half that we get will be way more than we're getting on our own, generally is the thought. Admittedly, a deal that I myself signed when I was in my 20s.
Oh, were you in a band once?
It seems great until, in our case, the label doesn't really do anything for you, and you're paying for everything yourself anyway. It's like, okay, all the money's going into the gas tank. Do I have to give you half of the T-shirt money from last night because it's already spent? Anyway, Brian Slagel back in, let's see.
When was it?
I guess it was around 83 when he put out Metal Massacre 3. And
did you just lose
Slayer's
your place
Aggressive
on the
Perfector
page?
Was
I forgot
in the lineup
what
with all the other
year
bands that were on Metal Massacre 3. If you know history of metal,
yeah, I do.
California, 80s, Metallica's first debut recording was on Metal Massacre.
Well, you mean after No Life Till Leather.
Same thing for Slayer. This was their first formal recording put out for audiences to purchase and listen to. The deal they ended up signing, I guess, with Metal Blade's CEO, was a result of him showing a lot of interest in the group, more so than anybody else, and him having a lot of, savvy and business expertise compared to everyone else that just maybe had a radio show that played a couple metal records every now and then. He was the king of the scene, as far as someone who wasn't in a band himself, apparently. I first heard of him when I started learning about Metallica's history back when I was getting into them in 91. You get to see interviews on MTV in the 90s with Brian Slagel. And it's just kind of years later, you'd see the guy from Ain't It Cool News being interviewed on E, the cable channel, or in DVD behind the scenes or retrospective interviews with people, movie experts, when you buy your copy of the remastered version of Reservoir Dogs that I've got in 2004 or whatever the fuck it was. There's an interview of him on there for some reason telling us stuff that we already know. I digress, but Brian Slagel is probably more fun to listen to than that guy. But visually, they're very similar. And they're very behind-the-scenes guys that were star makers or taste makers for the real talent. in my opinion. So he offers to sign the band to his new Metal Blade Records and manage them as well. They accepted, and they figured he's going to have their best interests at heart because the more money he makes, the more money they make, etc. He had the ability to like make relationships with a lot of influential people, keep business going, work with lots of different bands and magazines. He put in the time, and he put in the effort to do the kind of stuff that, generally artists don't have the time or the wherewithal to do. And they had 2 years, I guess, together that were fairly productive before they went, obviously, over to Rick Rubin with Def Jam Records. They saw this whole deal as an opportunity, not necessarily like a huge payday right away, but it was going to be better than what they were coming from, right? So he offers them a short contract, but it's a long-term commitment. Tom Araya apparently remembers it as a single piece of paper with just a couple of paragraphs. Slayer signed and locked themselves into a multi-album deal. Slagle takes the lion's share of the publishing rights, which is the most lucrative part of a record deal, and he would own Slayer's master recordings for the label. That's fairly common, publishing and masters in the business for, major labels signing somebody out of the blue that people don't know that much about. But, apparently he didn't pay for the recording sessions. And Tom Araya says, because we signed a contract, we literally just kind of gave everything to him, trusting our manager. And later on, you find out you signed your publishing away to this guy. Kerry King would say, you've got to put it in perspective. We wanted to be bigger. Brian made an offer to the band that had no offers, and we took it. I know Tom in particular, to this day, has been bitter about it. To me, Slagle was just doing his job, being a businessman. Kerry King and Jeff Henneman stayed friends with him. On the Steve Austin show in 2013, he called him one of his best friends. And then Slagle even, I guess it says in the book here that I'm reading from, which is called 66 2/3, this Jeff and Dave Years, a metal band biography by a guy that doesn't have his name on the spine or the front cover because he's just that modest, I guess. I mean, he's really not, but he's very outspoken in this book. D.X. Ferris. He's very, very smart, very, very well researched. He doesn't take himself too seriously, but he also doesn't take himself very lightly, I would say. I was like, Jesus Christ, what's with the font size in this goddamn book? There's so much like white space around the borders. The print is so tiny. Anyway, if you want to read about Slayer, I suggest this and his other book about Slayer, the 33 1/3 edition about Rain and Blood, which I'm going to buy after reading this. Clearly, the man did the only real good comprehensive works about Slayer in print that I've seen. Anyway, Henneman said Slagle was still one of his best friends. He's like us. He was a young guy, didn't really know what he was doing. He says it's his lawyer. The lawyer's the one that drew up the contracts. Well, yeah, that's what lawyers do. We didn't know what we were doing, so we signed them. And he's still getting paid writer's fees for stuff me, Carrie, Tom wrote. He's getting half of it, and it pisses you off because he didn't write any of it. So I take it. So I misspoke. Kerry King called him one of his best friends on the Steve Austin show. And, but after Henneman took ill before he died, Slagle was one of the few music people he still kept in contact with. So I kind of like the Henneman approach of like, yeah, he's been fucking us this whole time, but I'm still in touch with him and I'm still hanging out with him. I feel like there are something, how do I say this properly? As I'm trying to be diplomatic here, someone's full of shit. Because either you sue the guy once you get Def Jam money, or maybe you don't get a lot of money from Def Jam right away, because I don't think Rick Rubin is known for treating everybody in those early days all that well financially. Danzig's got his complaints, and Danzig also says that the Beastie Boys have their complaints. I know the Black Crowes have their complaints, and I'm sure Slayer business-wise, could have done better, but where they kept working with him creatively off and on for a little while till they realized they didn't need him, I think, in my opinion. But if you feel that way about Slagle taking half your money all those years, you can renegotiate. You can like, hey, there was 2 paragraphs on a scrappy piece of paper from back in 1983. We're going to lawyer up, and we're taking this to court. No offense, buddy. We're still friends, but you know you don't deserve half of the Metal Blade proceeds from the stuff we did for you. We helped you out a lot with those recordings after we got bigger on Def Jam and Def American and then American Records. So don't bitch about it if you're not willing to go back and get what's yours. I say business wise, don't be friends with the guy and hate his guts. But I don't believe. I think you should just go. You should just be honest and say what's the most logical thing. Yeah, we were pissed about it for a long time. We didn't have the money to actually sue him over it, and it would look bad for us. And now we're a lot older, and we're kind of glad we didn't. Now we're a lot older, and we've done fine, and he's done fine. And the money that he's made off of us has helped a lot of other metal bands that maybe couldn't have gotten the push that they got if the Slayer money wasn't coming into Metal Blade. Now, if you're someone who knows more about Metal Blade than me,
like
that's
everyone listening
anyone that's
to
read
this,
anything about Metal Blade and their business dealings, I'm absolutely certain you could argue with me and tell me how stupid and wrong I am about various things if you've gotten into those details. And I'm more than willing to just admit I'm just speculating here.
That's brave of you.
But that's what I think.
Have you taken a moment today to thank a radish for the joys in your life? Maybe you should. What else are you gonna do? Go to work? Pray? Have a loving relationship with somebody? I don't think so. Go to radishmattress.com/filibuster/Pirates of the Caribbean bootleg merchandise/Disney.da.ru
and get a free trial of a Radish mattress today. Thank you so much.
Thank me.
Radish Mattress for sponsoring A History of Rock and Roll and Film and Rock and Roll. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please check out the Patreon links in the description and some other ways of supporting the show for no money. Just thanks for being here, enjoying all the stuff I'm just throwing at you left and right.
No one's enjoying your fabulous Thunderbirds living room demo of bumper music for a non-existent commercial. Anyway, for crying out loud, let's talk about the film, please. Can we talk about the cotton-picking film, for God's sake, now?
Hello everyone, welcome to BBC 2. Today we'll be reading from an interview with Green Room director Jeremy Saulnier. This is from slashfilm.com. It's a interview with Green Room's director, as I said, and it's from 2016 when it came out.
Oh, the preparation you did
after
would
seeing
make
it at
Mark
Film
Maron
Festival.
proud.
Opening of the interview is, oh, it's very cool. I liked it. Oh, yes, thank you. That's a great crowd. I'm glad they liked it. And they ask about the whole punks versus Nazis siege movie concept of this being kind of wild to the interviewer from their perspective, I guess. And they ask about how it came to him. He said, actually, I wanted to make a green room movie. Environment is very key to how I develop stories. Having been in a punk band and falling in love with the aesthetic and the energy and the music, I've been at lots of concert venues. I thought it would be really cool to capture that energy. And boy, did he, I gotta say. What better place in the venue to set a siege thriller than the green room? It was my obsession. It's a lost relic now, but I did a short film in 2007 as one of those 48-hour film festivals that took place in a green room. And I assume what he was referring to is, I don't know what he's referring to. I guess 48-hour film festival is 2 days worth of showing films. I guess but my brain defaulted to there being a stipulation that you only have 48 hours to make a film, and then you have to submit it as is. I've heard of those too, but I'm not sure what he means. But he says he shot that little short movie in his basement. It was a dark gonzo comedy about a heavy metal band playing a record backwards and summoning a demon. Really kind of a fun and hammy thing with heavy metal atmosphere. So I was always playing with that idea. When I finally got the chance to do it the right way, I leaped at it. I knew it was my next movie. Skinheads were certainly a part of the punk movement, especially in the 1990s when I was a part of it. I was in the hardcore scene in Virginia. When we sort of crossed the bridge into Washington, D.C., we had shows that were much bigger and much more eclectic crowd. You had all kinds of different subgenres of punk rockers and hardcore kids, and amongst them was Nazi skinheads. That was definitely bizarre that people would be out in bright sunlight during a matinee show proudly wearing swastikas. That element of danger stuck with me. I knew they were part of the world of punk and hardcore, yet very different as far as ideology and structure. They wore uniforms, and they were easily identifiable. They were like soldiers. They had relations with outside gangs and criminal activities. There were also sharp skinheads against racial prejudice, a set of skinheads with a whole different set of ethics and belief systems who fought hard for all the right causes. But it just so happened that the Nazi skinhead element is what piqued my interest, as there are natural adversaries in this sort of world. He then talks about how he really didn't flesh out the idea much in the intervening time. He just had the concept. It's a siege movie in a green room, with the punk band. And it was like 20 years, I guess, kind of bubbling under the surface because of the environment he had been in, playing in bands. That was part of me and something I always wanted to bring on screen. But the actual plot, how the film unfolds structurally, was completely uncharted for me. So when I sat down to write, I had this deep well of knowledge regarding the world of punk and hardcore. I had personal experience from being in bands and my friends being in bands and touring and falling asleep in vans. I played that Mexican restaurant show showcased in the first 10 minutes of the movie. So have I. But at the same time, I had no idea where the plot was going to go. So I had this brand new energy that I injected into this old premise. That's where I had the most fun, finally realizing what was bubbling inside of me for decades, yet having no clue where I'd take it and inhabiting the world of the characters on both sides of the door. That's one thing I have to say, he does very effectively. It's not just, from the protagonist's perspective and all the focus is on them. While you don't necessarily develop sympathy for the antagonists as they grow in number and lay siege, you do. One of the things I think that's compelling about the movie is seeing how they operate and see how things change as the night goes later and later, and they get more desperate, but not. It's not like desperate and flailing and making mistakes and being inept. It's desperate. Therefore, like there's a ticking sort of clock on their end, so they have to accelerate, try a couple of different methods, add more people to the fighting force. He says, I would act both sides and always try to adhere to logic and very human choices and not play into too many genre tropes and standard forced contrived plot elements. Yeah, good for you. They talk about Murder Party and Blue Ruin coming before this a little bit. And he talks about, he has a thing for, because if you look at that and this film, those films, he says, I definitely have a thing for putting characters way out of their depths and watching them flail. Then they ask, the characters we love and the characters we hate suffer such incredible violence in this movie. How do you find that fine line between shocking and upsetting while also pleasing the midnight audiences who are going to gasp and cheer every horrible moment? He says, in Green Room, the gasps are real. People are sort of white-knuckling watching this movie. That's what I love. The involuntary responses their bodies create. It's pretty hard to do to make people actually terrified. It's about making the characters relatable, about breaking a few rules. Not just to break them, but to keep things off balance. Let people know that they're not going where they're supposed to go. You go where the characters take you, which is terrifying because these people have no fucking idea what they're doing. As for the violence, because there's so much brutality in Green Room and there's some full frontal gore, it can be perceived as sensational. But the way I treat it, if you look and scrutinize every moment, it's very reverent. It's about these characters. It's about these kids, these band members transition into killers. It's a gut punch every step of the way. I make it hurt. It's important that when you see someone die in a movie, for me, there's some kind of reason behind it, whether it be motivated by a character or serving a definitive narrative purpose. It's never just for entertainment, but the overall effect is to entertain. Got to agree with all that. He did that really well, very effectively. There was no point at which someone like instantly like a switch flips and someone becomes a badass. It's just suffering every step of the way, and the violence and the injury forces characters into making choices. He says there's nothing sadistic in Green Room. There's brutal indifference and self-preservation, but there's only one act of unmotivated violence, and that's what sets off the whole film and sets the whole plot into motion. Everything else is brutal, pragmatic, and reluctant. If anyone could just erase what happened that night, they would. They would all just go home quietly and resume their own pursuits. This is about a clash. This is about a war. It's more responsible and more impactful when we show these kids becoming killers. There is a full frontal shot of that happening, and it is, without fail, the most shocking moment in the movie. But it's also quiet and reverent and disgusting. If you watch it 2 times, you'll notice there are no gratuitous close-ups when there's a death. We definitely have a little fun with makeup and non-fatal wounds, though. I have certain rules, and I break them. I don't let them govern me. But I tend towards a deep respect for characters. When life is lost, the impact must be felt. Otherwise, the characters weren't there and the actors weren't doing their jobs. So they bring up Patrick Stewart and ask how he got involved. The thing about someone like Patrick Stewart is when you're doing an independent punk rock genre flick, Patrick Stewart has to choose you. He got involved because he was looking for something fun, something adventurous to shake things up a bit. It just so happened that he had just joined the same management company that I was part of. The name got tossed around, and after the initial barrier of, wait, Professor X? Seriously? That wouldn't work? I started to get text messages with photos of him with this beard, not in his normal superhero getup. The thing about Patrick is that he has had such a long career, but he's known popularly as a couple of these characters in science fiction franchises. He was excited about doing something different. Anyway, he got his hands on the script, really responded, and was deeply affected by the tension. This was late in the game. We were in deep shit, actually. We were trying to cast the movie, and he just swooped in and saved the day and lent his support and his craft and his dedication to the film. He was just a huge asset. Also, once he was on board, everything clicked into gear. We had reached a new level of legitimacy. Not that we were all worshiping his star power. We were just excited that he was interested, and he just kind of melted into the cast and crew. It was really exciting. We just had another great actor who was really invested in his role join the ensemble. I was expecting something different, and I was very much comforted by his presence. We had a rapid-fire ramp-up to establishing his character. He basically signed on the week before we shot him, so he was on a plane to Poland from England very quickly. His first day on set, we shot his big finale. We had to work backwards with his character, establishing his character from Act 3 and backtrack to 1 and his big intro. He really classed up our otherwise sleazy movie.
I hate turnips. They're like radishes, but they're huge. They're way more dense, and they hurt more when someone throws them at your face.
All right, let's return to the story of Minor Threat. And I'm going to do something highly unprofessional, but I still love doing it from time to time when there's a chunk of history in a particular book that I think has a good flow to it, I
What a
make no
convenient
bones or
excuse.
excuses about the fact that sometimes it's just better and more entertaining for me just to do straight up audiobook narration on the fly and read just right off the page instead of rewording it or compressing it into my own sort of timeline.
Any prep and planning ahead.
This is straight out of
Your butt.
the chapter "Wild in the Streets" from Going Underground, American Punk, 79 to 89 by George Hurchala.
Is that how he would pronounce it?
In the first couple of years of DC, hardcore bands that didn't have a certain hardcore image were not always viewed favorably. While both Ian MacKaye and Henry Garfield, soon to be known Henry Rollins, had bonded as curly-haired young skaters in 1981, their shaved heads, hardcore attitude, and tendency towards violence influenced other members of the scene to emulate them. Even those who were too slight and cherubic to look very hardcore themselves sometimes insisted that others do. When Minor Threat split up in 1982, bassist Brian Baker joined Government Issue on guitar. He quickly became a thorn in the side of John Stab Schroeder, the flamboyant and charismatic frontman. And yeah, I'm getting into a portion here that's not strictly about the history of Minor Threat, all bottled up. It's more what I found to be an interesting tangent that involves Minor Threat and some of their band members interacting with other bands. He says, I wore goofy and wacky clothes, recalled Stab, and I was the self-proclaimed clown prince of hardcore, but I was doing it just to be different. Jack Grisham from TSOL was a huge, huge inspiration on my fashion. He wore things to irritate people. After the show we played opening for them, I just went all out. Cool, an electric green tuxedo outfit. I'm going to wear that on stage. Anything that would blind or sear the human eye. I would try to wear it so people would be, man, turn that thing off. I'd wear a big clown shirt. I was trying to bring some entertainment factor into the harder than hardcore scene. Brian Baker played with me in GI in 1982. That's Government Issue. We were friends and had some good times until I realized he was trying to manipulate my band. He told them, we just played with Glenn Danzig and the Misfits, and they said, you guys are really cool, but what's up with your fucking singer? He dresses like a clown. And the Misfits are guys who look like just stepped off of Sabrina and the Groovy Ghoulies set. They're telling me how I'm dressing? Brian was all embarrassed and telling the band, we're not being taken seriously as a hardcore band with John and his wacky wardrobe. The band was all telling me this on the phone and saying it was a problem, and I remember talking to Ian MacKaye at Haagen-Dazs about it, where he worked with Henry Garfield. He didn't tell me that Lyle was coming back and Minor Threat was reforming. That saved it from being a violent blow-up because I was ready to kick Brian's ass, but he left to go back to Minor Threat, fortunately. Years later, I found out from Steve Hansgen, who was one of Brian's best friends and played bass in the 1983 lineup of Minor Threat, that Brian was convinced he could completely control me. He would say, I've got power. I can make sure he'll dress more like Ian. He will do this. Brian actually came to me and offered me money to stop wearing wacky wardrobe because he was this little rich kid. Look, I'll pay you. Here's $100. Please stop wearing this stuff. I didn't even take the money. It made me go out and get worse stuff. I love it. I love anything that pisses off punk fashionistas. I never got into any punk scene personally because it just seemed like there's a lot of the word is now gatekeeping, but I just didn't have the gumption or the drive to ingratiate myself in anyone else's sort of look or scene or whatever. So I don't throw stones, really. Like, if it's something that you found naturally or it came along and it saved you, I'm really happy. I love stories like that. I just don't relate to a lot of it, but I'm sure different place, different time, definitely could have been my thing. I don't know, though. I like harmonies. I like my punk bands like Bad Religion and Misfits and Social Distortion, so... I enjoy me some Circle Jerk, some Black Flag more and more as I get older, though. And there's plenty others. There's plenty other great punk bands I don't need to name because you don't need to hear what I listen to necessarily unless it relates, somewhat tangentially to the story I'm telling here. But I'm going to jump into American Hardcore by Stephen Blush, which I've used multiple times on a history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll, especially the Misfits episodes. And I think I've probably jumped into it for reference already on this episode. And we're going to I'm going to read a ton of quotes from people. This is covering the breakup of the Teen Idols in fall of 81. It says that's when the first DC hardcore record came out, their Minor Disturbance 7-inch. The first release on Discord Records. While not very good, the Primal Disc signified things to come. Ian MacKay says, the Teen Idols recorded 8 songs. When the band broke up, we had this money in a cigar box, money we'd saved up all year. We could have split the money up and had $150 each. Or we could put out a record. Everybody said to put out a record. There were 4-song EPs, but no 8-song EPs. We just thought value for money. The narration then says the scene exploded right after the Teen Idols broke up. Nathan Strachek started a youth brigade, not the LA outfit, with Tom Clinton, Danny Ingram, and Bert Quiros, the latter two from Alec McKay's group, The Untouchables. Meanwhile, Ian MacKay and Jeff Nelson hooked up with Georgetown day school students Lyle Preslar and Brian Baker to form Minor Threat. Lyle's previous combo, the Extorts, or Vile Lyle and the Extorts, that's a great fucking name, played just one show, of course, just one show with an awesome name like that. It has to nothing good can last, can it? Played just one show on the roof of the Georgetown New Wave clothes store, Smash. The other Extorts started SOA, State of Alert, with Henry Garfield on vocals, and John Stabb started Government Issue. GDS was real hardcore breeding ground. From there came Pressler, Baker, Hampton, Guy Pizziato, Brendan Canty, Mark Haggerty, and Chris Haskett, later of Rollins' band. Guy and Brendan of Insurrection were the DOD Dance of Death boys. When kids slam danced, the two of them rolled around on the floor. If you did the DOD now, you'd be killed. Brian Baker says, my intro to punk, believe it or not, was the result of peer pressure. I grew up in D.C., went to GDS. It was a matter of osmosis. I was 14 and had low self-esteem. The only people I knew cut all their hair off. GDS guys were intimidated by kids from public schools. After I went to that first Teen Idols show, I went to everything with a handmade flyer. Narration then says, Henry Garfield scooped ice cream at a Haagen-Dazs shop in Georgetown, and he sometimes took a portable record player to work. Often, a few friends would hang out until closing, at which time Henry cranked the latest Misfits or AC/DC records while cleaning up. Henry's stint with SOA lasted October 80 through summer 81. They used a few songs from their brief Extorts experience. Henry jumped in and rewrote the lyrics. I saw SOA once. They were a mess, but Henry was ferocious. Their No Policy EP from Discord in 81 made a little impact at the time. After SOA's demise, bassist Wendell Blow formed Iron Cross with vocalist Sab Gray, while guitarist Michael Hampton and Ivor Hansen, son of Admiral Thor B. Hansen, went on to The Faith with Alex MacKay. Henry changed his surname to Rollins and split to LA to join Black Flag. And then Tom Berard says, Minor Threat and SOA played together all the time. I loved Minor Threat, but SOA were so much more fun. It's un-PC to admit it, but it was more violent. The slam dancing during SOA was way more intense. At the shows, we were all friends. We all knew each other. Nobody was trying to hurt anybody. You just went at it harder during SOA. Jack Rabid, the editor of The Big Takeover, says, to this day, I think the Teen Idol single sucks. Only because we know the people involved. We still think it's important. The SOA record sucks as well. It's toneless garbage. I swear to you, Steve, if Henry Garfield jumped off a bridge in 81 and there was never a Henry Rollins, no one would give a fuck about that SOA single either. Whereas if Ian MacKay jumped off a bridge in 85 and there was never a Fugazi, people would still be buying Minor Threat records up the wazoo. That's my basis for making a clear distinction between Minor Threat and SOA, considering they were such close friends. That's nice. I like that. SOA's final show before Henry joined Black Flag occurred July 81 in the blue-collar South Philly hood of Kensington. For months after that, you'd hear of the nasty showdown that night in which Philly cops sat back as a vicious mob of urban rednecks with baseball bats attacked unsuspecting hardcore kids. Ian MacKay says, in Philadelphia, a Black Flag show turned into the biggest riot because we were in the wrong neighborhood to be fucking with kids. It was SOA's last show, opening for Black Flag at the Starlight Ballroom in a neighborhood called Kensington. About 30 of us drove up. It was a big gig. There were a bunch of Philly punks, a bunch of New Jersey kids, some New York kids, and a whole bunch of us. At this point, people had gotten cocky and were trying to fight all the time. My role was to cool things down and break up fights, which is interesting because I've read other accounts of Ian MacKaye in his early hardcore days going up to New York and trying to start fights with people in clubs, attacking people, you know, because they look different. They had longer hair or something like that, which is not, you know, that's not exclusive to him. That was part of the scene, but he ramped that up. He was one of the guys that, you know, wanted to ramp up violence against people that didn't look the way he thought they should look. Admittedly, I'm not saying anything that plenty of other people didn't talk about and he himself wouldn't admit to, I'm sure. But maybe he just grew up that fast. Maybe he progressed his attitudes that fast, and now he's a peacekeeper. He's trying to keep things on the rails for this show, at least. He said, then when Flag was playing, some kids who came in off the street were being really weird. They were Polish or Irish Catholic, all in white muscle tees, looking crazy looking kids. I don't know how it got started. I was trying to get it to cool down, but nobody would listen to me, and I went to the side of the stage to watch the show. Then I saw a fight break out, and the kids from the neighborhood take off with a bunch of DC kids chasing them. A pretty typical scene at shows at this time. But I thought, something's weird about this. The stage was in front of the building on the second floor. So I was able to go down a flight of stairs to try to head them off at the pass. I came down the flight of stairs to intercept, but everyone kept running past me. At the front of the club, you're on one street looking down at another street, and these kids just went down that street, and 12 to 15 DC kids ran right after them. They got about half a block. Oh, is this bait? Did they bait them into running away from the show? They got about half a block down when all these other kids came out of from two alleys with bats and sticks. And I remember Sean from Void and his brother just kept running all the way around the block, and everyone else tried to make their way back and run through that line. So many people got hammered. It was terrifying. Jamie Biddle got his head split open. People were fighting everywhere. Then 4 or 5 police cars pulled up and got us separated. The DC kids were on the side of the street, and all these Kensington kids were on the other. Still, the Kensington kids would run across the street past the police cars and start punching us. The cops were very angry about this situation, so they said, in 5 minutes, you're leaving. You're welcome to leave now, or you can sort it out on your own. Everyone was scrambling to their cars to get to leave now, to get the fuck out. I got in my car, a 1970 Duster. Nice. And my alternator died, so my battery was dead. I went to one of the cops and said, I need a jump start. So he gave me a jump start. He was the last cop there. Fuck me. It was raining in the middle of the night. So we made it about 3 blocks, and I could feel the engine dying, so I turned off the radio, then the wipers, and then the lights. We finally broke down in the tunnel underneath Society Hill. Me and Ann and Cynthia crawled up a ladder through the street and came up a sewer and slept in the park on the ground. It was a real lesson. In one of the fights with the Philly kids, Mark busted the nose of a kid who turned out to be best friends with Allison Schenkenberger, who ran Southern Studios for a long time. She hated us for that. Minor Threat played Philly at this BYO event. Lyle was a snoot to her, and she really hated us. We became good friends years later, but she told me how much she fucking hated us. I was mortified to realize how much hatred we instilled in people. We were such assholes. Now, going back to the reputation that Jello Biafra had for, you know, encouraging younger bands and being a good promoter for them and trying to sort of network and help them out. There's a quick 2 paragraphs from the Mission of Burma section of Our Band Could Be Your Life by Michael Azerrad. That caught my eye while I was looking through the whole book for mentions of dead Kennedys. And it said, in 1981, 3-week tours of the Midwest, South, and West drummed up a buzz for the band. That fall, they played a big show in Hollywood with the Circle Jerks and Dead Kennedys, but the hardcore punks in the audience were unimpressed. We got out there, and we were like little lambs to slaughter, says Conley. We were art punk weenies out there. All the audience did was murmur and spit at the band. Not the most enlightened audience, is it? Jello Biafra asked them after their set. After the show, the crowd erupted into a huge riot. Now, in the chapter that covers the comings and goings of Husker Du, it talks about the West Coast tour they were doing, where he played in Seattle with the Farts, which is a band that at one time included Mr. Duff McKagan, who went on to be in Guns and Roses, both. And they, let's see, word got around town fast. A local promoter put them on the bill with the Dead Kennedys at the Showbox before 900 people, by far the Huskers' biggest crowd to date. After the success in Seattle, it was down to Portland. About 12 people showed up. Usually what we do was be as antagonistic as possible and try to clear the room at that point, Norton says. There wasn't anybody there. We might as well see if we can piss everybody off and make them leave. You do what you have to do to entertain yourself. The band made noise and feedback until everyone went away. Fortunately, the Dead Kennedys' Jello Biafra had really enjoyed the Seattle show and invited them not just to stay at his house in San Francisco, but to open for the Dead Kennedys at Mabuhay Gardens, where they played a tornadic 20-minute set at an overpacked club. It was really cool at first. The kids were having fun diving off the stage. Then they started thrashing into us, said Bob Mold. It was so packed, the bouncers couldn't get them out the back, so they had to drag them across the stage during our songs. We didn't stop, and the tension just kept on building. Biafra was a very helpful host, even forging rent receipts for the band so they could get food stamps, which is, wow, that's intense, which is crucial since they'd long since run out of money. Next stop was Southern California, where Mike Watt was trying to line up some gigs for them. But it was the height of LA's unofficial ban on hardcore shows, so Hart, Mold, and Norton went straight back to Minneapolis. They arrived to find that Minneapolis was a different place. While Husker Du was away, the Replacements had created a stir. Not only was there competition for the Minneapolis punk crown, but the competition was now the pet project of their nemesis, Twin Tone. That year, they were proving themselves at all costs, says Terry Katzman, then a local sound man and journalist. They knew when they came back to Minneapolis that the Replacements were going and the ante had gone up. And I bring all this up because it was the influence of the Dead Kennedys that basically bolstered the Husker Du crew to speed things up and get more aggressive at this challenge from hometown competitors, the Replacements. It was definitely a result of playing shows with Dead Kennedys and also sort of being encouraged by them to know that they could ratchet things up a bit. They had it in them. Now, Jello is also credited, at least in the book American Hardcore, by Stephen Rosen, with being the first guy to do the whole crowd surfing thing, because he would dive into the audience, lie on his back, and then get passed around. Joe Carducci from SST says they were great. I saw them the first time in Portland. They were doing California Uber Alles, and there was this break in the middle part. Jello was sitting on a table, Indian style, chanting with his eyes closed, mocking the Jerry Brown meditation bullshit. One local girl pushed the table over, so when he got off the floor with the mic, when the lyrics kicked back in, he began using her in the dramatization of the lyrics. He was sharp. People were usually so amateurish. If you knock someone off a table in another band, they might have started crying. They had made a move, I guess, the Dead Kennedys, to contract for IRS Records to release their album Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables in the U.S., which turned out to not work well for them, apparently. It was only available on import via UK indie Cherry Red for the whole first year after it had been pressed. So after that disaster, they stuck to their do-it-yourself version of production and manufacture and promotion, apparently. He said, Jello says that Jim Forat, who in some ways I owe my entire livelihood to, played California Uber Alles to Bob Last of Fast Product, who released it in England. We sold maybe 1,000 in the U.S., and in 1 week, 20,000 in England. People hadn't heard anything like us over there. We knew there were cool bands here, but English people generally didn't. The people who came to see us play kept asking, why are you the only good band in the United States? I said, there's so many more. You just have to hear them. At the time, it was impossible for an underground American band to get attention unless it was an arty one from New York who had connections. That was the original motive for Let Them Eat Jelly Beans, to expose British Dead Kennedy fans to the big picture. But music writers and labels over there didn't want to know. We put it out on Alternative Tentacles because there was no label there that would touch it, not even Cherry Red, who put out Fresh Fruit. They said they didn't want to be closely associated with Dead Kennedys. Shortly thereafter, they weren't. So Jello goes on to sort of get some help from a European manager named Bill Gilliam and start Alternative Tentacles, a label that is just born from this sort of frustration. He saw the Dills, Screamers, and Negative Trend come and go without recording albums. So Dead Kennedy puts out their first singles and LP, and then Alternative Tentacles puts out Let Them Eat Jelly Beans in early 81. So side one is apparently sort of considered the more hardcore, having more in line with what Black Flag, DOA, and Bad Brains were doing. Side two is a little more experimental sounding, more along the lines of Giza X, The Feeders, and Voice Farm. None of these bands are well known to me, so I'll leave it to you to find your own comparisons or see if these ones work out, the ones chosen by Steve Rosen. I'll take his word for it. So during this time, Jello gets a reputation for liking eccentric artists like, the Butthole Surfers, Half Japanese, and Crucifix, and, does what he can to promote them in the scene in his own way. And then they put out two Dead Kennedys, 7 inches, or a 7-inch and a 12-inch in late 81, Too Drunk to Fuck and In God We Trust Incorporated. Then they put out discs by DOA, 7 Seconds, and TSOL. And summer of 82, Dead Kennedys put out Plastic Surgery Disasters. Now, Steve Rosen says that in their heyday, the Dead Kennedys and Alternative Tentacles had a cool scene and a bustling enterprise. Through manager Mike Vraney, I met the AT crew. Freaky African-American drummer Darren D.H. Peligro Henley. Laid-back guitarist East Bay Ray Pepperell. Egghead bassist Jeff Klaus Fluoride Lyle. Roadie and jack of all trades Michael Microwave Bonanno, artist Winston Smith, and soundman Chris Grayson. One of the TSOL guys, said Chris, later live mixer for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, was murdered in 1990, hacked into pieces and stuffed in a bus station locker over a bad drug deal. One of hardcore's most startling case studies, Peligro, as a hyperactive child from the St. Louis ghettos, got turned on to Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stole a drum set from his school to emulate those heroes. After a few years of jamming out on Aerosmith and ZZ Top numbers, he threw that old drum set onto a Greyhound bus bound for San Francisco with $8 in his pocket. He spent a few weeks living on the streets, then stumbled on a warehouse filled with decadent speed-shooting homeless punkers. There he met and started to play drums with the group SSI. He says SSI was named, this is Peligro, the Supplemental Security Income. It means you're crazy. It used to be a lot easier to get. People would do speed and stay up for weeks, shove peanut butter up their ass and eat it, all sorts of other tricks to get SSI. Don't bathe, stank, talk incoherently, wear gay bondage stuff, crazy, whacked out, or go in there butt naked. Take your pants off and complain it's too hot when it's cold. It's a lot cooler in San Francisco, or just sort of start undressing slowly. I guess psychiatrists were a bit more gullible back in the day. And D.H. Peligro has writing credits on some Chili Pepper stuff in the late 80s, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen that on the guitar tab. And I want to... I'm going to go on the record and say that he was also in a band with Tom Morello pre-Rage Against the Machine. It might have been Lockup. You can find their video on the YouTubes. Let me double check what the hell it is, so I don't just send people off on a wild goose chase here. Hi, okay, I'm back. With the magic of editing, you didn't have to sit through that little Googling that I was doing. Yeah, he was in Lockup with Tom Morello. You can see 3 of their songs played live in 1990 on the Reelin' in the Years YouTube channel. You can also, very importantly, find the official video for Nothing New from 1990. And it is the most 1990 thing in the whole universe. The history of the band apparently involved a lot of lineup changes in a short period of time. It was originally guitar player Mike Livingston of the Mau Mau's and Kevin Wood on bass. They had been in a band called Ella and the Blacks, which included Brian Grillo and Brandon Mullen from The Mask. founder of The Mask, the first LA punk rock club, excuse me. Grillo becomes the lead singer. And the original drummer was Michael Lee. He was replaced by D.H. Peligro briefly, who had been in the Dead Kennedys, and later in Red Hot Chili Peppers, which I didn't know he was an actual band member. And then he was replaced by Vince Ostertag. They got a production deal with Third Story Music in 87. Then they went to Geffen after attracting the attention of someone who was an A&R person at Slash Records, Anna Statman. And when she got a new job at Geffen, she signed them first before anybody else. So there we go. Their guy Livingston left in 87, and in early 88, he was replaced by Tom Morello. And then a guy named Chris Beebe on bass. They put out one album on Geffen called Something Bitchin' This Way Comes. So then they broke up after Vince was replaced by a guy named John Knox, who played drums. And then John encourages bass player Tim Comerford and Zach De La Rocha to jam with Morello and drummer Brad Wilk. I guess Brad Wilk had unsuccessfully auditioned for Lockup at one point. There we go. And then they went on to become a little something of a bit of concern called Rage Against the Machine. So there we go. Sidebar detour there into the Dead Kennedys extended multiverse. If you're not that familiar with a history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll, this is your first episode you've ever heard. That happens a lot when I get a little bit of a bug in my brain, a little bee in my bonnet about a factoid that I'm too frightened to misremember on the record and make a fool out of myself over, so I have to go check it out. And that just helps the show become a little more diverse anyway, and not just me reading straight off the page. I will say, though, I end up reading straight off the page when the stories are so intensely interesting and well documented. I don't do that with every artist and every author. A lot of shitty music journalism out there, a lot of bad biographers out there. Hey, if you listen to more episodes of the show, you'll find out more about my methodology and delivery. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for listening to something so different and so weird and so just its own goofy thing that's just done by one person in their living room. All right, time to straight up read the words right off of the page from chapter 15 of the Slayer book, Rain and Blood, by Mr. Ferris. He says, Rain and Blood, long story short, as related in further detail in the book 33 1/3, Slayer's Rain and Blood with some fresh perspective. In 1985, Metallica were the kings of thrash, the number 2 spot up for grabs. Slayer would grab that position and maybe the all-time number 1 slot, with the help of a nascent, most unlikely musical mogul. November 15 and 16, 1985, Slayer played a 2-night stand at L'Amour, a club known to the locals as L'Amours, accurately hyped in commercials as the rock capital of Brooklyn. In the audience was Rick Rubin, the country's hottest rap producer and co-CEO of the hottest hip-hop label on the planet. In coming decades, Rubin would produce Johnny Cash, the Dixie Chicks, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Joan Jett, Tom Petty, ACT. We know this shit, all right? Fuck off. In 2007, he became the head of Columbia Records, one of the few remaining record labels. Yeah. But in 1985, the future music industry powerhouse was, I'm not saying fuck you to the author, by the way. I'm just like, fuck you if you expect him to read all. We already know who the guy is and what he's done. He grew up a well-to-do family in Long Island's Lido Beach. He had recently graduated from New York University. While in college, he founded Def Jam in his dorm room. A monolithic row of apartments called Weinstein Residence Hall on University Place. His Raw Dog production on T-La Rock's seminal hip-hop single It's Yours caught the ear of Russell Simmons, a rising young promoter who was surprised to learn the audio ace was white. In the 80s, popular culture was racially polarized. Michael Jackson and Prince helped bring black music to the top 40 audience. But Def Jam and hip-hop did more than its share to reintegrate black and white culture on the street level. Rubin lived by the maxim often attributed to Duke Ellington. There are two types of music, good and bad. Rubin liked the good stuff. If you roll your eyes or you want to blow off the implication that, music was racially polarized in the 80s when, looking back, there's so many black artists that were popular in the 80s, feel free to check out the greatest night, the biggest night in pop documentary. It's been on Netflix for years about the making of USA for Africa, We Are the World. Not so much for the story. I mean, watch it for the story of the recording of that fucking song because it's a wacky story. But to see footage of the American Music Awards at the time that an era I lived through as a child watching on TV and didn't think anything of it, but I had forgotten a long time ago that music award categories were segregated by black and white. I mean, they didn't give white prizes. They gave regular prizes and they gave black prizes. It's legitimately a thing that happened in my lifetime. It's still happening in my lifetime. And and I'm sure that was someone's idea of like, oh, this is very progressive. We're going to include the blacks in our television award program. Best Black Artist was an actual category you won awards for. So if you don't want to watch the documentary, just look at old footage on YouTube of award shows from the 80s that had black artist awards. So let's see. He says, Rubin loved rough and tumble culture, including punk, pro wrestling, and metal. He came of age playing guitar and listening to Devo, and the more extreme music became, the more he liked it. In September 85, Rubin finished work on LL Cool J's Radio, and the Beastie Boys' License to Ill was also in progress. Rubin and some friends hit the town to catch a few acts at CMJ, a new music seminar. A show at the Ritz featured Bad Brains, Megadeth, and another metal group that really put a zap on Rubin's head. Slayer headlined, Rubin recalled. Megadeth played before them, and either Exodus or Anthrax before that. I don't recall much of anything that night before Slayer. I think, if I remember right, that might have been this gig that got Anthrax signed to Island Records off of Megaforce. They totally annihilated. Clearly, no other band mattered that night at the Ritz. I can't imagine any other band in the world mattering that night. In November, Slayer returned to New York, still supporting Hell Awaits, for a 2-night stand at L'Amour. The first show was no fluke. Rubin had to have them. He made his way backstage, met the band, and asked what it would take to do a deal. And nobody said no to Rick Rubin. If they did, it didn't stick. His salesman father had taught him a thing or two about dealing with people. Rubin followed Slayer's bloody trail to California. He found one of the best metal albums in the history of the genre, ready to be polished up and released into the world. Which is an amazing thing to say because, yeah, Slayer did get polished by his production style and whatever his input was when you compare it to the sound of Show No Mercy or Hell Awaits. But it's not polished like Master of Puppets is polished. It's not layered, you know what I mean? It's not polished like the work that Anthrax was about to do pretty soon with Eddie Kramer. It's raw. It's really raw sounding, but in a way that is strong and all up in your face. Not raw and sloppy and messy, sounding like the production styles of their stuff before this. Anyway, some of you are like, yes, Jay, we know what Slayer sounds like. I know. Not everybody does. If I gave into those voices in my head, I would never do a single episode of the show. All right. If you already know about the stuff I'm talking to you about, just appreciate that someone gives a fuck. Enjoy someone else appreciating the thing that you appreciate, for crying out loud. So, beset by nightmares and intrigued by the Third Reich, Hanneman began writing Rain and Blood in late 85. During the day, he would read about the darker aspects of World War II, and at night, he and Araya would cruise around in the singer's Camaro, driving from Downey to Long Beach and back, drinking beers and catching a buzz. More songs started to emerge. Kerry King stayed home, took care of his growing snake collection, watched horror movies, and started writing riffs. Before long, Slayer had a 33-minute demo tape of Rain and Blood. They played the demo for Brian Slagle, who was ready to get the band in the studio. Metal Blade's Lizzie Borden sold well, but Slayer moved as many records as almost the rest of the roster. The label didn't have all its hopes pinned to Slayer, but it had a lot of them. Then, before Brian Slagle could get Rain and Blood on tape, Rubin landed in California on a mission to find the group. No matter how good he was, Slagle couldn't match Def Jam's distribution or management connections. After some legal wrangling, Rubin arranged for the band to be sprung from their Metal Blade contract. Slagle remained friends with King and Hanneman. He didn't take the split too personally. It did hurt, though. Oh, did it hurt? Yeah, sorry. You did your job. Your artist got the attention of a bigger label. That's the fucking point. You all make out a lot better that way. I mean, in the short term. That's why you do what you do on the indie level. Because if people don't see success from working with you, they're not as likely to sign with you. It's not the same for everybody, I know. But, you know, if tons of bands sign to a label and then don't get out from under that label and they just die there, doesn't look good. There's exceptions, obviously. Jesus Christ. I could feel, it's just John Travolta in Pulp Fiction right now. Could you stop looking at me like I can feel your look? I tell you, I got Tarantino on the brain because of all this Nazi shit I've been fucking dwelling on with Green Room and stuff. I'm ready to, it's time to rewatch Inglourious Bastards for the 50th time. And then Reservoir Dogs. Obviously, that's not Nazi themed, but you know, once you get on a Tarantino roll, sometimes you want to keep feeding that momentum. The next chunk here talks about more of the Def Jam transition here. When the band signed to Def Jam, he felt not too pleased at that time, recalls Howell. I forget who Howell is. They were a band on the upswing. They were one of the most popular bands on Metal Blade at that time, but they were offered a bigger, better deal. That was a bit rough for a time. I don't think it was dramatic enough to use the word betrayal, but the plan was to follow up Hell Awaits on Metal Blade. Slayer traded their past accomplishments for future freedom. The band were free to move on with Def Jam. All connections to Slagle severed. Metal Blade retained the rights to records it had issued so far. Combined, Slayer's first 4 releases eventually sold over 1 million units. Rain and Blood is top-of-the-line, top-shelf liquor of thrash, says Howell. But that catalog will always turn a profit. As it played out, Slayer wound up on Def Jam, a label that was home to LL Cool J, the Beastie Boys, and eventually Public Enemy, Third Base, and Slick Rick. If you don't know Third Base, feel free to check out the video for Pop Goes the Weasel, where they beat the living fuck out of Henry Rollins with baseball bats. Why would Henry agree to that, you say? Because he was working as an actor, and he was dressed like Vanilla Ice for that video. Let's see. They were nice kids, Simmons said. They looked fun. I didn't know. I wasn't even interested because they didn't rap. Me and all the hip-hop kids that were part of my group looked up and said, wow, I don't know what the fuck this is. This is Rick Rubin's shit. In the engrossing coffee table book Def Jam Recordings, the first 25 years of the last great record label, a vibrant black and white photo by Josh Chius captures the 1986 Def Jam All-Stars, an incongruous roster for the ages. Oh my God, this has to be an amazing photo. This is one of those things that should have been a poster in like every college dorm for 30 years, but it wasn't. I need to find this image. The long-haired members of Slayer, bright-eyed and smiling, stand tall next to the disheveled Beastie Boys, the bekangled members of Run DMC, and George DeCoulius, the future producer of the Black Crowes, and Tom Petty, the Heartbreakers. Notes the caption, Rick Rubin is fond of this picture because you can really see the cultures clashing, a hallmark of Def Jam, although it can also be seen as a portrait of pleasantly surprising Our Gang compatibility. Our Gang was a series of short comedy films featuring very small young children performers in the, I don't know when it was. I don't know what year it was. I used to watch I saw it on Sunday mornings when I was a kid in the 80s. It was back in the ye olde times. Our Gang, Little Rascals is what they were renamed later. Buckwheat, Spanky, and whoever, Our Gang. Very modern reference for the young kids in the audience. Anyway, so 6 months after they meet Rick Rubin, the album's recorded and finished. They did it in Hit City West, co-founded by Andy Wallace, who was nearly 40 when he recorded Rain and Blood, a musician turned studio pro. He had engineered The Doors and American Prayer and remixed Madonna. Later, he would win a Grammy for his engineering work on Sheryl Crow's The Globe Sessions and help squeeze the best out of bands from Foo Fighters to Faith Hill. And he did what he could do for Guns N' Roses' Chinese Democracy. I think Andy Wallace worked on one of my favorite records of all time, Las Exorcisto, Devil Music Volume 1, if I'm not mistaken. Lombardo said about Rick Rubin, besides the fact that I look up to his approach with how he works with musicians and songwriters, he's got a great attitude in the studio. He'll bring out the best in you. He'll mention, this is a good area to elaborate on. He'll tell you, lead into this next part with a drum roll. He'll give me different ideas. He fertilizes the talent. He really brings it out. And according to this text, they recorded the whole record sober. Rubin was sober as well. Very clean. No fucking around. Just business in the studio, getting things done as concisely as possible. And no farting around with any self-indulgent overdubby ideas or wacky effects or nothing. If you hear the difference between Hell Awaits and Rain and Blood is very fluid and concise, says Dave Lombardo. I think Rubin maybe made us a little more accessible to some people, to where maybe those people wouldn't have given it a chance otherwise. I don't know. I think he just got them in front of more audience members that were ready for Slayer. I don't think the average person that was put off by Hell Awaits would hear Rain and Blood and go, "Oh, okay. Well, I didn't think I would like that band, but this is more my style." They just hear fast, dark, heavy metal with that fairly tuneless to their ears heavy metal. It's a cleaner production, but that just sticks the aggression even harder in your craw. When it's Slayer, not when it's Metallica. When it's Metallica, it's like, cleaned up and shortened and full of excuses being made by the band in interviews that aren't worded like excuses. They're just telling you it's better because it's slower. That means it's heavier. They're telling. I remember them telling me that in magazines. It's heavier because it's slower and it's simpler, so it's heavier. Got it. Thanks, guys. You're lucky I was 14 at the time and I still believe whatever you said.
That was a great anecdote. What next? What next?
Some direct quotes from people from the scene about Minor Threat.
I love those.
Tesco V says, Minor Threat in their prime was the most intense, heart-thumping punk experience I had ever had and will ever have again. Every other band paled in comparison.
Damn, have you ever seen Blink-182, pal? Come on now.
If kids today could only hear the passion, the ferocity, and the hate, the vitriol that flew between those guys that fueled the band. It's a chemistry you can't buy. To a man, they hated each other. Ian's very dogmatic. Jeff Nelson's very private. They're all very stubborn and set in their way. Lyle Pressler, we call the G. Gordon Liddy of hardcore because he walked into a room and just like somebody's dad, commanded all the respect and hatred. That's fantastic. I love it so much. Brian Baker, who nowadays is in Bad Religion, as a lot of people probably already know. Minor Threat existed for Ian to write. Teen Idols were the most popular band in DC that they had a record out. And they had a record out. It wasn't that Ian wanted to be the star of the show. He just wanted to put it to his own words. Lyle and I went to school together, but we weren't friends. Ian and Jeff knew they were going to dump Teen Idols, and Ian knew he wanted to sing. I don't know how Lyle met Ian, But they had a guitarist, drummer, and singer, and I honestly believe I got the gig because I was the only punker in D.C. that played a stringed instrument and was not currently starting another band. I was 15, Lyle 17, Ian and Jeff 18. If Minor Threat hadn't been good, it wouldn't have been a big deal. The two things were the band could play, and Ian's a genius. There's something special about him. Now, Ian, talking about the first shows they played in Minor Threat, says the first thing they did was a party. He didn't really expand on it detail-wise, but then they play the Unheard Music Festival, and it's a big show in D.C., and he says there was a different feeling for this band than his previous experiences because it was just so solid. And it was all a very confident feeling that no one had in the Teen Idols. He talks about doing a show with Circle Jerks, a band that inspired Minor Threat a lot. The Group Sex album was phenomenal. I remember thinking, I'm going to blow them off the stage. During sound check, I was screaming at a wall. I hit it so hard that something went snap in my throat. I lost my voice completely. So I wrote the lyrics on signs and held the signs up, and the whole crowd sung. That was a great show. Wow. There's a lot of other people would be so self-involved that they would say that was probably the worst show they ever had. But a very, very cool artistic view of what could have been a disaster from a guy like that is something I respect. So there's a quote here from Ken Inouye from Marginal Man. Inouye, maybe, is the pronunciation, Inouye. He says, that show was interesting because Ian lost his voice. They nearly canceled that gig. When they got on stage, Lyle got on the mic. Ian has something he wants to say to you. Ian stood up there with these flashcards. I have lost my voice. And with the last bit of voice he had left, screamed into the mic for guilty of being white. And then the crowd went bananas. Everybody had already gotten the demo, so they knew the words. Here was a band that didn't even have a record out, but everyone was singing along loud enough you could hear it over the PA. Around this time, I guess the Bad Brains come to D.C., or not come to D.C., they were around D.C., but they were going to get more involved with Minor Threat. And that's great for them in their minds because they're a huge influence on Minor Threat. And they were in need of facilities, the Bad Brains. They had apparently exhausted all the goodwill of the landlords and people that ran practice spaces for bands, rehearsal spaces for bands in the D.C. area, and they turned to young Ian MacKaye for a little bit of help. And Ian hooks them up the best he can. But this would be a bit exhausting, apparently, for the guys in Minor Threat. This situation going forward. Brian Baker says, I heard the lore and heard the tapes and was totally intimidated by this incredible band. Grown men who were really playing their instruments. They were real musicians, and we were kids. I had to borrow Daryl Jennifer's bass amp. I'm like 5 feet tall with eyeglasses and spiky brown hair. Excuse me, sir. Can I borrow your bass amp to create punk rock? The whole time. I remember. Now, the only thing I remember now is a lot of adrenaline. It was an overwhelming thing for me. And I guess sort of pairing up with Bad Brains during this time was sort of keeping the boys on their toes, wearing them out a bit, trying to keep up with their heroes. There's a chunk of the chapter now that goes into the whole straight edge thing. You can read as much of that as yourself as you like. I don't feel the need to explore it too much. A lot of people have different opinions about it, or its origins as a cultural thing and as a catchphrase or as a blanket term for people, what it meant to them. Brian Baker says it was one song about it, for crying out loud. And, the author of the book says, the Stephen Rosen says, there's like 3 songs out of 26 written by Minor Threat that concern that whole philosophy. But he also says that just as things really got going for them, Minor Threat broke up for the first time in September 1981 when Lyle Preslar went off to Northwestern University. Ian and Jeff Nelson teamed up with guitarist Eddie Janney and bassist John Falls, and in the basement of the Arlington house they named it Discord House, launched Skewbald, or Grand Union as Jeff called it. Skewbald recorded 3 songs in December 1981 but never played live. Also around that time came the underground tape of Roslyn Rangers. a project with Ian on piano and Nathan Strijek on vocals, along with Sab Gray and Rich Moore. Brian Baker went off to play guitar with Government Issue, but things didn't click for Lyle at college, so he came home in March of '82 and returned to Minor Threat, who hit the road that summer. Baker says Government Issue is what I did when we had our first breakup after In My Eyes. In My Eyes is the first Minor Threat song I probably ever heard, me personally, because of the Rage Against the Machine covers album that came out in 99, 2000. Yeah, I think it was 2000. I'm still mad at Rage Against the Machine for not putting song credits in the liner notes of that thing. I don't understand it. I don't understand not giving credit for the bands that you supposedly are influenced by. I mean, great that those artists got paid because, Rage covered their stuff, but I don't understand. I'm like, this is before everybody had cheap internet access. You couldn't just, go look up Wikipedia and the name of the song and find out what band it was. Anyways, like I remember maybe future pressings of those liner notes have the credits. If somebody knows, please call in and tell me, because I looked through that thing multiple times on multiple days, just disbelieving, going, I must have missed something. There's got to be some. Maybe it's like written upside down or backwards somewhere. Nope. Just that whole stupid thing about writing on dollar bills. Anyway, so he wanted to play, but he wasn't invited to join Ian and Jeff. He was in Government Issue. And he'd gone to New York, played a few times, done a record, and Skewbald never got off the ground. One day I got a call from Ian that Lyle was back from college. The question was if we could try to do this again. And I, of course, said yes. By this time, Minor Threat as a myth had started to build. We were bigger after we'd broken up than we ever were together. Instantly, we were the biggest band in D.C., bigger than Bad Brains. I wanted to be in the biggest band in the world. I called Government Issue. Sorry, but if you were me, you'd do this too. It was amicable after singer John Stabb calmed down, but everyone else understood and didn't have a problem. So then Ian says, in the summer of '81, we were doing really good gigs. We had to go on tour, so we went out with the D.C. Youth Brigade. We got Tommy Clinton's mom's van, my Duster, Brian Baker's mom's Volvo, and took off. We had shows all the way across the country with 16-year-old kids riding with us. Tom Berard, my brother, Anna Connolly, Giovanna, Mary Skinhead, all these kids. First, we went to Lansing and hooked up with the Necros. Then we did a Chicago show, a show at O'Banion's, and a gig at the Madison, in Madison, Wisconsin, I guess. Then we got a call from Tommy Clinton's mom, bring the van back or you're not going to college. We had shows all the way across the country, but they had to go back. So they took the equipment with them. We stayed in the Volvo and the Duster. We played the shows in Detroit and Windsor, Canada. Then we came home. We were discouraged. We didn't make it to the West Coast. We wanted to meet these people. We were all writing to each other and talking on the phone. We came back and did a show. Minor Threat, Scream, Youth Brigade maybe, and The Faith probably. It was a 9:30 club show, and the line was down the block. That was the show where everyone was like, whoa, this shit's large. So we played a few more shows. Our last show in September '81 was at this party at Janelle's house. It sounds so funny. Yeah, the last show we did was a party at Janelle's house. We were so huge. Then Lyle went off to school. We weren't mad at each other. He was just going to college. So he was gone. I tried to do Skewbald with Jeff, and it was not working out. Keep in mind, this is a really busy time for Discord. We were on our 5th single and still working on the Flex Your Head album. We moved into the Discord house, which was a big deal too. That was the first group house that set a whole new tone. Before, all kids involved with punk rock lived at home with their parents. Discord house changed everything. In early '82, I remember seeing the Bad Brains after they'd gone across the country on tour, and I was talking to HR. I said, how was it? He said, oh man, it was great. So many kids everywhere. People want to see Minor Threat. I said, that band's done with. He said, you just sing about straight edge and leave it at that. You've got to go out there and play. You started something. You've got to finish it. Coming from HR, it was a really big deal to me. It so happened that Lyle came home at Christmas and said, I really miss the band. It turned out his roommate at Northwestern was Kato from the horrible piece of shit band Urge. Is this Urge Overkill? It is Urge Overkill. So I was... I don't have any opinions about Urge Overkill. I just rewatched the video for Sister Havana on YouTube last week, and that's the first time I've seen that. And started the video and heard the song since 1993 or 4, whenever it came out. Came out like at least I want to say 6 months before the Pulp Fiction soundtrack when they got famous for covering Neil Diamond. So he's talking to Lyle and said, let's reform. Lyle quits school, comes home at Easter, and they start playing again. Their first show back, April 29th, 1982, Bad Brains and Minor Threat. 2 shows at the 930 Club. We opened with the infamous Cashing In song and threw money at the crowd. Then we told our friends we were going to reform. People were furious at us. It really upset me how mad everybody was for us, at us for reforming. Even my brother said, you're selling out. Then we did a Wilson Center show the next night, which was the night I started going out with Cynthia Connolly. That's more than I've ever known about Ian MacKay's personal life.
All right, let's stop pretending that life is okay without a mattress made of radishes in your life. That's the only way to meditate and find peace is on a radish mattress. Think about it, won't you?
Now, at a certain point in the story of American hardcore, Stephen Blush. Oh, man. Stephen Blush. I think I said Stephen Rosen. Hey, if I said Stephen Rosen earlier in this episode, I meant Stephen Blush. I think Steve Rosen did like a really lackluster Black Sabbath biography where he just interviewed Bill Ward, and that was it. Sorry about that, Stephen Blush. I'll have to put something at the beginning of this episode to talk about that. So anyway, there's a section of the narrative where he points out that the Dead Kennedys eventually become the top act of the hardcore era. Those are his words. I have nothing to cross-check that against. I can't disprove it. He says they were a considerably larger draw than Black Flag or Circle Jerks, but they weren't as successful as you'd think. Winston Smith says we still all had to pile into Klaus's station wagon. There were no limos. We had to carry our own equipment. There were no groupies backstage. You had to clean the trash and slime on the instruments and hope that your car hadn't been towed away or stolen while you were at the club. There was nothing glittery about it. Many talented people were not appreciated because they were the same people who had to sweep up the mess at the end of the night, too. A lot of us had day jobs at a copy shop or making sandwiches. If we wanted to go to the movies, we'd grab our pennies and wait for the bus. Literally. I don't know why he said literally. The figuratively waiting for the bus is not a common axiom in the English language. So the book goes on to point out that there was internal problems happening within Dead Kennedys, especially around 1984. The guys are into their 30s at this point. East Bay Ray and Klaus grew uneasy with the young, violent audience. Don't blame them for that. Always fucked up, D.H. Peligro began a downward spiral where he'd play with the Chili Peppers for a few months in 88, but was too far gone even for them. They split bitterly with Mike Vrani, who left to manage the new TSOL, whatever that was, compared to the old TSOL. I don't know enough about TSOL to make any insinuations there. Dead Kennedy still played great gigs, but at the end of the day, everyone got sick of Biafra's histrionics. All right. I don't know that everyone in the band, I guess, or everyone in the scene, man. I don't know. I'm out of my depth here. There's a lot of opinion in this book's narrative, and that's the right of the author. God damn it. What am I going to argue with? But I'd be curious. I mean, I'm not so curious. I'm going to hunt down like every recorded interview with Jello Biafra to find out what his side of every bit of the story was. This is not that day. Maybe someday, but not today. He goes on to point out that Jello was going through his own personal hell. He had married his girlfriend Teresa in 82, and it was great for a while. Let's see. In late 83, though, his pal Frank discussion of the Phoenix outfit, The Feeders, with a Z, went on the lam after the feds caught on to him pulling some elaborate prank, circulating a letter on Arizona Board of Education stationery to local schools offering scholarships for winners of an essay contest on why school is a waste of time. After hiding out at Biafra's house for almost a year, Jesus, Frank. Frank ran off with Teresa. Oh, no. And Jello's money. Okay, the way that's written, I don't know if he means he ran off with his wife, Teresa, and all of Jello's money, or just Jello and Teresa's money. He says many of Jello's pals feel that he never recovered from that. And I don't know, well, since when? Like ever? Since, I don't know, the late 80s, early 90s? Let's see. This was published in 2001. Hopefully the last 24 years, Jello's gotten over it. By 86, they played the same thrash as the kids. DKs knew it was time to throw in the towel. Because, like, comparatively, I guess back in 81, they were touring the United States sounding like nobody else. D.H. Peligro says, East Bay walked in one day and said, I've got a bomb to drop on you. I'm leaving the band. We scrambled around thinking maybe getting Ron Emery from TSOL. But in the end, we came to the conclusion that just wouldn't be the Dead Kennedys anymore. So we just hung it up after that. And I was really broken. With all the havoc and all the bullshit and all the racial tension that I got, at least I had Dead Kennedys, and we were in it together. There was a part of me that still wanted to carry on, to believe that our greatest shit was yet to come. Stephen Blush says, personal and professional problems aside, a highly publicized obscenity suit killed the Kennedys after they included an H.R. Giger poster with their 85 LP, Frankenchrist. Deputy L.A. Attorney Michael Garino filed criminal charges against Biafra and Alternative Tentacles for distributing harmful material to minors after a San Fernando Valley housewife complained to authorities her teen daughter brought home the album from a warehouse record store in Northridge Fashion Mall. The ACLU came to AT's defense, but the entire episode killed the business, which operated on a very tight margin. Yeah, Jesus Christ. You can't have a huge legal fund at hand. We were just running an indie punk record label in the 80s. But I guess then maybe it's not so wise to go to doing stuff that's going to get... I'm sure he wouldn't have done it if he knew the lengths to which they were going to be prosecuted as well as persecuted. But, geez. Big, Landscape XX by H.R. Giger from 1973 is the poster. It's very anatomical, like a lot of Mr. Giger's work. H.R. Giger stands for, hey, really Giger. If you're a Giger fan and you want to enjoy a little bit of the old Super Ego crew having a little fun with the thought experiment of what it would be like if H.R. Giger was your dad, go look up Super Ego H.R. Giger. It's been around for a while. That's probably not the kind of thing that most people have seen unless they saw it back when it was new. Makes me laugh every time. And I'm not even a big Super Ego fan. I'm not getting around that paywall for all that stuff. I know they're brilliant and they're funny and everything if that's the kind of thing you're into, but I've got a lot on my plate to listen to already. I need to go back through 20 years of improv sketch comedy in audio form from the same three guys and a friend of theirs every now and then. So anyways, justice prevailed. The court dismissed charges, but the damage was done. The group ran out of steam. In late 86, right after their final show at UC Davis and the release of Bedtime for Democracy, Biafra announced to the world that Dead Kennedys would be no more. Jello says, yep, that's when we broke up. I'm not sure it's over, but there's no plans for some stupid-ass reunion tour. The music lives on. The words still stand. People still pick up the albums in small but consistent amounts, something like the Velvet Underground, but on a smaller scale. I would hope I and Dead Kennedys helped smash the 70s. Going after what came after it is a much harder job. That's a hell of a statement, and I believe it. I believe you could have, at that point, I could absolutely see, after all that struggle and all that time, so little reward for all your efforts, just going, yeah, okay, I'm not killing myself doing that. I'm not smashing myself to pieces on this rock. It's time for someone else to take stock of the new landscape and see what they can do. So he goes on to do spoken word records and tours, but retreats quite a bit during the next, 8 years, I guess. a lot of alienation, a lot of isolation. And then in 1994, apparently he took a vicious beating by some San Francisco skinheads that Stephen Blush says were down with maximum rock and roll, though Biafra had originally spread MRR gospel. Editor Tim Yohannan and crew protected the assailants' identities. If you ever needed proof that the whole scene unity was a crock of shit, that was it. At press time, Ray, Klaus, and DH, who tours and records as Peligro, won a $220,000 judgment against Biafra and Alternative Tentacles for royalties due. Well, that sucks. Sucks that they had to sue for royalties. It sucks that between the three of them, they got $220,000 that they then had to share with their lawyers. I wonder what was left for them each individually after that. Hopefully something they could, invest with or put towards some sort of safe place to live. I don't know. I don't know what their life was like after Dead Kennedys, but hopefully that 220 large was enough to give them some sort of a break. I mean, Jello obviously went on to start numerous other side projects like Lard with Al Jurgensen, I believe, and what the heck else? Hang on. Okay, I did a goggle for his bands, and apparently, in some regard, he was connected also with, besides Lard, he did some stuff with Brujeria. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. That's a band I've been aware of for a long time because there's certain members of certain other metal bands that I like have been in it or helped start it or record in that band and tour in that band. And not least among them is bassist for Faith No More and the guitarist for Fear Factory. And also, I guess he did some stuff with Revolting Cocks. I didn't know about that. I think he did Palehead, or am I remembering wrong? He did Pigface. He's associated with Teenage Time Killers, apparently. I don't know their stuff, so I won't speak to it. But Jello Biafra and the Guantanamo School of Medicine is probably, let's see, they put out an album called The Audacity of Hype in October 2009. So there you go. If you're curious, you can go look up some of his stuff and check it out, man.
Rock and roll music and why I preach against it, and I believe with all of my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
I'm in business. I'm putting it down, ain't I? I ain't hearing no amens, but I ain't wanting any. No. Hellfire. Hellfire. All right.
I want to read a quote from Mr. D.X. Ferris from the Slayer book to then springboard off of the couple thoughts of my own about Slayer. In one of the chapters covering Rain and Blood, he talks about how some fans interpret Slayer's fixation on Nazi imagery, history, and personalities as a tacit endorsement of the evil empire and its lingering ideologies. But the band are ethnically diverse, and their social circles even more so. Neither Tom or Dave are, white guys. And there's other part of this book where the author talks about how Jeff Hanneman was great friends with Rocky George from Suicidal Tendencies, who is black, and they even formed a side project band together. They were that close. And then eventually Rick Rubin kind of stepped in and said, hey, you guys shouldn't be doing side projects. And that was the end of that, apparently. Because the other guys weren't going to break them up, but apparently they were in favor of them breaking up, so they sided with Rick Rubin. The recurring themes are no juvenile obsession with a forbidden aesthetic. Rather, they give Slayer's work a sociological, political, and historical subtext that is utterly absent in whatever erudite bands headline last summer's hot-ticket music festivals. I will also say that I got to I got to stand in front of Ice-T back in 1999 at a spoken word thing he did on a college campus. And everybody there was mostly a fan of his hip-hop stuff, which is understandable. I was like the one long-haired guy that showed up in line to get in front of that microphone and ask him what it was like. I just told him I thought what he had done with Body Count was, admirable and cool. And what was it like working with Slayer on the soundtrack to Judgment Night? And he actually brought it up. He was like talking about, it was pretty cool hanging out with them in the studio, doing this cover song from a hardcore punk band. At the time, he said he remembered it being The Exploited, but that wasn't actually the band. But he said they were really cool, and then they were hanging out on the couch watching the news, and down in LA there was some story they broke about like Nazi skinhead youth camps, and they're someone was trying to make a big deal about the fact that one of the kids being interviewed or pictured in it was wearing a Slayer t-shirt, and the guys in the band started laughing because they're sitting there on the couch next to this gangster rap pioneer who's black. And they said, Ice-T said this, he said, and they just laughed and they said, oh, wait till this fucking song comes out because it's really going to fuck them up. And then he said, and he's like, Tom's not even white. He's like, he's from, and I go, he's Chilean. He's like, yeah, he's Chilean, and Dave Lombardo's from Cuba. And he's like, yeah, man, it's just, he had nothing but cool shit to say about working with Slayer, and I just told him I appreciated it. And thanks for answering my question. Someone else asked him what it was like to be on tour with Guns N' Roses, or he then launched into talking about touring with Guns N' Roses because he was talking about metal. And he's like, Guns N' Roses, man, they had this whole touring life down. They had strippers show up every night at like 6:00 or whatever time it was in the evening backstage, and they had a stripper pole, and they had parties and stuff before they went on stage for hours, and he had a good time with them. Obviously, Metallica did not. Someone who might be more overtly racist, although changed his ways or kept it quiet, or maybe, I don't know, was James Hetfield. Like, did I already talk about this? How he said he didn't like Body Count or rap because it was all extra black in Rolling Stone. He was on the cover of Rolling Stone for that interview. Anyhow, I know I've talked about it, so I don't want to go back over it again. Another thing I'll say about the whole, perception by outsiders that Slayer are Nazis or into promoting that kind of stuff through their imagery. The old school Satanic Wehrmacht T-shirts and stuff with the skull with the German helmet on it, and the just the fascist symbol of that eagle. I have no desire to argue in their favor to a young person who's seeing that for the first time and didn't grow up with some of the edgier, more provocative elements of the scene. I still love Stormtroopers of Death, Speak English or Die, because I know it's a joke, but I don't expect any newcomer to that culture to understand the joke. But I will say, Slayer did do the repentless killology, however you say it, of videos where tons of neo-Nazis get murdered by the hero of the story. Which I think is as clear a message as they can send as possible as to, look, we don't want you if you're in our fan base. This is how we feel about the Nazi associations over the years. That's my interpretation. Now, as far as Slayer's approach to being asked about meaning when it comes to their records, here's a little exchange with the author of the Slayer book and Carrie. This is from 2007. Hello 8s is a big, scary album, but to me, Rain and Blood says something about the world. King, we just got better. But to you, is Rain about something? King, no, none of our albums have been. You just look at it as you wrote 10 songs and that's what it is? King, yeah, end of conversation.
And a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family. Did you fail to dress up for tonight's show? No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves. Don't forget to visit our refreshment center during the intermission or any time. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. So will the youngsters. Everything is quality and So good. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see, delightful snacks to nibble. A gay, pleasant evening for all.
Now, here's a interview with director Jeremy Saulnier from Vox magazine back in May, I think it is, of 2016. They bring up how, how good he was at keeping tension going and keeping the movie claustrophobic. And he says you just have to use confined space as your greatest advantage. For this movie, I set the premise up very early on. Once that scenario takes hold, with the band trapped in the room and the Nazis getting aggressive outside, it was not really minding that space, trying to dig in and find details and props and using the geography itself as a way to create the film out of that. I had a blast just making a laundry list of available resources. With this high concept idea, I could find myself to an indie filmmaker's comfort zone, which is, now what do I have? I've got amplifiers, I've got microphones, I've got pit bulls. I was creating my own comfort zone to work with and then going full tilt within those boundaries. They ask about staying at a smaller budget. After Blue Ruin, he would have had, clearance for takeoff, right? Like he had that success, and he could have upped the next budget maybe to $20 million or something like that. And he said, I was warned not to do a union film between $3 million and $6 million, and I did it. I jumped right in. It was a very tough budget to work within. Most importantly, paying union wages to be part of a sustainable filmmaking community was my primary objective as far as the business end. You have all the same problems as a $3 million entity. You're fighting for schedule. You're fighting for budget. I was on a very steep learning curve, and it was probably something I don't want to do again. Until it was fully realized and mixed and mastered and delivered, no one knew what the hell the film was. It was a very valuable experience to take this from script to screen and all the way through the release and see how the industry works. Most of my films were made outside of the industry on my own terms, and I had flexibility and full faith and trust in those that I had around me. This is a lot more diplomacy and pitching and working within the confines of the industry and under the governance of the committee of people who are all very much invested in the film. It's so based on texture and noise and experience, the film itself, he means. And until it was fully realized and mixed and mastered and delivered, no one knew what the hell this film was. Sorry about that repeat. I'm reading this off of a paywall blocked website, and I'm using a extension in my browser that allows me to read this for free, and I think that's messed with some of the formatting. So I just read earlier I read a pull quote that should have been large and bold that was also embedded in the regular text of the paragraph, and neither one of them were large or in bold. Anyways, he says, on telling a story in one place, there's a mathematical pleasure when it comes to screenwriting for me. He says he wanted to make a movie set in a punk rock hardcore world. It was an easy next step to say, well, where does that take place? It takes place in a music venue or on the road. Once I had a venue in mind, then you go, what can I do here in this action movie genre space? He talks about having a mathematical pleasure that he takes in the construction of this film. Problem solving when it comes to screenwriting, because he had written himself into this confined area and then had to find ways to write out of those corners he was sort of penned into. And he said, I had the benefit of this building inside me for almost a decade, but the plot, details, and overall story were just completely fresh. 2 examples. One would be when I was able to inject a little bit of real-world pragmatic calling of bullshit on Hollywood movies. My protagonist finds another layer beneath this concert venue. They come across an air duct. I was able to have the air ducts be up to code, which is 6 inches, and they didn't serve as an escape mechanism. What do you think should be in a movie? An easy out? What you think should be in a movie, an easy out, became a dead end. I've never seen that. We're going to talk about the 6-inch ducts and we're going to fucking forget about it. Oh, wait a second. That's just a dead end. You start to feel unsure, like, well, how are we going to get out of here? Maybe we're not. Holy shit, we're in real jeopardy. The other moment was a very natural mining of the environment for a sequence. It was when I thought of the idea for Amber, played by Imogen Poots. and Pat, played by Anton Yelchin, to fend off a pit bull attack by using available resources on stage, which involves amplifiers and microphones and feedback. Now, the next bit he talks about, he gives some good credit to his editor here, because the interviewer brings up the violence, the gore, the impact of some of the more brutal actions perpetrated on characters in this. And he says that was all very much designed in the script, but there was so much technical editing that Julia Block and I did. We were going through every single frame of that. Number one, we had to sell the gag. And it doesn't mean gag like funny joke. The gags are in horror or action. Gags are sort of like the visual stunt itself, the gore explosion or the impact of the wound or how that's sold, the violence, being sold to you as a realistic thing. He says you got to make it believable. That takes a lot of cutting, a lot of amazing on-set special makeup effects, and a lot of discipline in how you show it. Also knowing when to show a reaction, knowing when to throw away an effect and how to be in the background, and knowing when to go full frontal. That was usually starting with a very clear narrative intention to throw people off guard, to let them feel the peril the characters are in. Once, in particular, we're full frontal on a very disturbing box cutter use, and that was to transition along with the character who is committing the act of violence as they go from kid to killer. It's not just to establish a jump scare. It's to really pull the rug out from underneath them and have them feel like, oh shit, that ray of hope just has been completely destroyed. And now we have no clue where this film can go. There's always intentions behind the violence, and it's usually coupled with a very strong emotional impact. Now they bring up the character of Amber and how she shifts allegiance throughout the, activities that take place in the movie and ends up siding with, our main characters. And he says, it's fun to play with that. Her identity as a character and her backstory or lack thereof. She starts the film as as a hysterical girl crying in the corner of the room. And to play with that idea of maybe there's more to her. Just through her actions and her affiliation, she switches gears. She sees the real impact of violence, and that shakes her out of her labels and affiliations. That was fun to do with her as an actor, developing the character, and as a filmmaker regarding how we shot her. So we dismissed her as a viable character for the first third of her performance. She had to acclimate to this new environment, hold up with an out-of-town band. When she becomes active and part of this group, we pay attention to her as a character and start to shoot close-ups of her. She represents one of those thesis moments of the film, which is when you shake people down to their core, who your favorite band is doesn't define you. A lot of people in this white supremacist scene are recruited and manipulated, and they're often victims. She was transitioning from a victim to a heroine. They ask, Nazis have been go-to bad guys in action movies for years. What makes neo-Nazis work in that role as well? Jeremy says, their ideology certainly came into play, but it's not the content of the ideology. They are extremists within this subculture. They are more militant, and they tend toward holding more weapons. What I needed out of the hardcore scene wasn't Nazis. I needed soldiers, and that these soldiers would serve their purpose in my little punk rock war movie. I didn't go off on a monologue about race or nationalism, but what I did need was people with combat boots and uniforms and insignias and that organizational hierarchy that would make them serve, in my story, as the more expert adversary, served almost as a militia. That seemed to be the only choice in that regard. A bunch of pot-smoking metalheads or hard Christians or vegan kids who are straight edge didn't quite fit the bill. The neo-Nazis served a more practical purpose than an ideological one. They then bring up character development in the movie being very economical and very lean, and ask him about how he does that. And he said, I don't want to bash other movies. I'm so ready for whatever he's about to say right now. I don't want to bash other movies, but I get driven crazy by character depth and backstories that are falsely injected into screenplays. Yes! It drives me crazy because I really think trust the actors to perform physically, have a natural charisma. If you're just with people, you get their character. If you leave more to the imagination, then you can fill in the gaps. The actors were really game in knowing that so much of this film is physical, and it had to be presented in that way. We're not going to do recall past traumas. There's not conflict just for the sake of conflict. There's certainly enough in this movie as far as blunt force exchanges between them and the skinheads, but I based a lot of these characters on real people I knew growing up. And it wouldn't serve us to try to inject typical Hollywood arcs when I thought it would be very unmotivated to do so. I like the actors. I like the characters. The process isn't so much giving them all traditional full character arcs where they're all fully actualized or learn a lesson in the end. Yes! It's really just get to be up close and personal with these people, and you get to know them through trauma and comedy and very human moments. Fuck yes. I love reading that so much. God damn it. Not everything has to be a fucking character wheel journey heroes fucking sequence.
Oh, a word of caution. Don't drive over 10 miles an hour in the theater area for your safety's sake. And Mom or Pop, go with the kids when they leave the car. We hope you have a wonderful time. Come back soon.
So something I didn't know until I read this book about Slayer was that Dave Lombardo not only has left the band twice or been booted out, he left the band 3 times, and the first time was in 1987. They were touring on, after they had toured on Rain and Blood. He married the girl that he'd been in love with for a long time after they got their major label deal with Def Jam. You know, the guys had agreed to a no entourage kind of on-the-road attitude and rule well before that, and Lombardo made it clear that she was coming with him on the road, no matter what. If they wanted Dave Lombardo, they got Teresa as well. They didn't like that, but, you know, they dealt with it, and they resented her, and they resented her being there. They resented him more than her, is what it sounds like from reading these you know, accounts of things back then. She tried to steer clear of the other members of the band. She wasn't using up their time and their space or trying to get involved in the workings and doings of the band. She was just there to be with Dave, and Dave's point was like, hey, you can bring all the scumbags and sluts on the bus that you want. I've just got my person that's going to be there with me in my corner of the bus every day. That's who I want to be with. So I guess Jeff Henneman said he was being a prick. And once he was being a prick, we started being a prick to him. I mean, bad. So nothing good was going to come out of it. They would often, you know, get resentful while drinking. Carrie and Jeff would get drunk together and, you know, fume about what an asshole Dave was as far as they were concerned. And he is characterized by multiple people as being high-strung and maybe a little more obnoxious or anxious without in a way that other people think is without reason. He's just going to be high-strung and tense all the time about things that, you know, King Buzzo from the Melvins, who was in Fantomas with him, has said this about him. You know, he makes things stressful when they don't have to be, essentially. And other factors are making things stressful for Slayer. They're starting to attract more attention. There's people picketing outside their shows, and suddenly Tom Araya starts getting death threats, and his parents start getting threats on his life, on their home phone. Eventually, when they're preparing for a show at the Ritz in New York, there's a bit of a safety issue there because the band has to go in through the front door and there's no side or backstage entrance for them to use. So Rick Sales, who at this point, you know, comes from a partnership with Rick Rubin and is helping to sort of tour manage the band. Eventually he and Rick apparently their relationship would come to a head over control issues, and he would go on to manage a lot of very famous artists and do very well. But during this time, he was working sort of hand in hand with Rick at Def Jam, and he was trying to help Slayer kind of have a very professional touring experience. And when it came to coming to New York and the ramping up of death threats against Tom, he hired extra security apparently without making it super clear to the band, because they were like plainclothes guys that were kind of squeezing in around, and Tom wasn't expecting it, but you know, they also had a they noticed that there was tension between the band and Dave, and so Rick Rubin and Rick Sales kind of arranged for a little sit down, like a therapy sort of session, mediated sort of talk through. And this guy is, I take it back. It's not Rick Sales. Rick Sales is part of the big picture there when it comes to Slayer, but it's a guy named Cohen. Excuse me. SLAYER Cohen, the future Warner Music Group CEO. But he was a third right hand for Russell Simmons and Rubin's partner at Def Jam. Excuse me for me misspeaking again. I'm out of practice, folks. Thanks for hanging in there. No, I'm not going to go back and cut that out. That's just... I do edit things. You may not realize it. You may not suspect that I do edit things, but I really, really do. But I'm not doing that right now. So Carrie says during this mediated sort of therapy conversation type thing, he goes, every point we made, Dave would say, yeah, that's right, said King. So Jeff and I would say, so this is going to happen? And he'd agree with everything you said, but he'd say, no. We'd make these points, and this is why we don't want your wife here. So she's not coming, right? And Lombardo would say, no, she's coming. The meeting was a qualified success, says the author. Lombardo agreed to remain in the group and quit being a prick. Everything was ironed out, says Tom Araya, or so they thought. The truce didn't last long. Slayer returned home for the holidays. In California, their first meeting almost turned violent. Lombardo called the group and requested a meet at Slayer Central, the Araya Garage, where the band still practiced. Lombardo thought it would get bad, and he was ready. He brought a knife with him, but he left it in the car. Adrenaline pumping, the high-strung drummer met the band in Araya's driveway and got right down to business. He was out. He quit. The rest of the band had seen it coming. Holding their poker faces, they decided to let him go without a fight. It was like, I thought we discussed this in New York, recalled Araya. For me, it was more of a confusing moment. That was about it. They were like, oh, really? Okay. Lombardo later told Metal Maniacs. It was like it didn't even hurt them. They didn't even say anything about it. They just went on with their lives. So that kind of like got to me. Kerry King kind of snapped more than anybody about it. He was still furious about this incident over playing the Aardschok Festival. Metallica, as you probably know, lost their bass player, Cliff Burton. I was between Sweden and Norway in late 1986, and they were scheduled to headline the Aardschok Festival. Someone reached out to Rick Rubin and got a hold of Dave Lombardo about Slayer taking their place. And there was some confusion as to whether they were confirmed or not, but the rest of the band said, no, you don't speak for us, and we're not going. Kerry King felt personally that they weren't practiced enough at that point. They needed to get on the road for a new tour after some warm-up shows. And also, the other sort of sentiment within Slayer was it would not look good for us to jump into the empty space that Metallica had to leave because of the death of, Cliff Burton. We don't want to do that. So apparently there's a big disagreement with Dave's handling of that possible booking and the lack of communication that came from him. So King's furious about that still. After the painful negotiations in New York, Lombardo's sudden resignation sent King over the edge. He decided living without Lombardo would be easier than having the same conversations every week. Obviously, this is me reading from the book again. King and Hanneman started talking about who they were going to find to be the new drummer. Lombardo sat there in stunned disbelief, listening to them talk, surprised to be outside the circle so quickly. After a couple of minutes, he spoke. You know what, you guys? This was easier than I expected. It was great. See ya. He got in his car and drove off, remembered Araya, and we just looked at each other like, we need to find a drummer. And by the way, some of Dave's resentment and anger comes from the fact that the guys were getting publishing money from the sales of the albums, and he was not. He was getting an equal share of the cash from touring and merch, but not from songwriting because he didn't get credit on those records. Some bands will do that for their drummer, some bands won't. And Dave did not. Nobody, I guess, wanted to cut him in on that stuff. Also, he pissed people off because he didn't like packing up his own drums, apparently, very often. And the other guys would have to do it quite a bit. So there's that, too. Next Slayer segment, I'll jump ahead to 91, where Dave exits Slayer a second time.
Are you dead?
Well, I'm in pain, but no, I'm obviously not dead.
And obviously you didn't fucking die when the doc slapped you.
No.
So, including last night, that's 3 fucking damage incidents that didn't kill you. Pain or damage don't end the world. Or despair. Or fucking beatings. The world ends when you're dead. Until then, you got more punishment in store. Stand it like a man. And give some back.
In Michael Azarad's Our Band Could Be Your Life, he talks about the first Discord Minor Threat album, rather EP, that came out in early May 81. He says, in a mere 11 minutes, the 8 songs inveigh against blowhards, I Don't Want to Hear It, Stubborn Friends, Screaming at a Wall, Bible Freaks, filler. The songs were all about very specific aspects of their lives. Bottled violence rails at those who got drunk at shows and beat up people. Minor Threat warns of growing up too soon. Seeing Red is about getting taunted for looking like a punk. All of it packed powerful gut punch delivered at extreme velocity. The amazing thing was you could also sing along with it. Minor Threat had delivered a quintessential hardcore document. Mackay talks about growing up in Washington, D.C., and he said, when you live in Washington and you see these people downtown, it's like, who are these people? Who are these starched motherfuckers? It is such a falsehood. It's so gross to me and so weird. So much the antithesis of anything natural. I just hate it. I've always hated it. When I was a kid, I hated the mask of adulthood, and I was threatened by it. The author points out, though, that they didn't really tackle larger political issues in their lyrics, mostly concentrating internally or on interpersonal conflicts. We're pretty much middle class, upper middle class, whatever, Nelson says. Maybe that had something to do with it. I think it would have been false bravado and swaggering if we were much more vicious and bitching about the system oppressing us. McKay points out that, you know, he also avoided taking pot shots at Reagan because that was such a standard thing to do at the time. The author says, it took far more nerve to call your own people to task than deplore things like the situation in El Salvador, which Mackay feels most bands didn't even understand anyway. I fucking hated Reagan, Mackay says. I've always hated the government. I guess what I felt like was it wasn't my domain. I didn't know enough about politics to really sing about them. And I didn't know enough about the world to really sing about it. But I knew enough about my world to sing about it. The whole point is if you deal with yourself and people you can exert influence upon, says Preslar, then maybe you can put those people in a mentality that will be beneficial to everybody else later on. And that's the only hope you can possibly have. Ian says of the sort of lyrical style that you'd encounter in the scene sometimes, that really direct, clear thing that leaves no wriggle room for anybody, it comes off way too much like, I know every fucking thing in the world. The author points out that, you know, his lyrics were pretty much all just addressed at some unidentified second person. So the effect on the listener was simultaneously to feel accused, the singer is hollering at you all the time, and righteous, the you is easily transferred to someone in the listener's own life. The lyrics set up such a well-defined value system that people bonded tightly with Mackay as an arbiter, a moral compass, particularly for the inordinate number of abused and neglected kids who had embraced the hardcore subculture. There was definitely a point early in Minor Threat where he was a preaching motherfucker, says Nelson. It definitely was holier than thou sometimes. And how could it not be when you're presenting so vehemently and so stridently such an anti-establishment approach? My approach would have been more conciliatory. It would not have had quite the same impact, I don't think. I don't think it was a conscious thing. That's the way he is. He is very direct and unabashed. He and his brothers and sister were raised in a family environment that were very open-minded, very 60s influenced. His parents, says Henry Rollins, raised their kids in a tolerant, super intellectual, open-minded atmosphere. I think they're both real hippies, real deal microbus, be in, drop out hippie. So they didn't whack the kids around, and there wasn't a go do this and be all you can be, rah, rah, rah. It was like, well, son, let's listen to what you're listening to. During Ian's teenage years, the house was filled with all of Ian's crazy dyed hair friends who were very wonderful people who I know to this day. And Ian's parents never batted an eye. You'd come in with a mohawk and his mother, Ginger, would go, oh, wow, that's really wild. Do you want something to eat? It was never a double take ever. His dad was a former White House correspondent for the Washington Post, I guess. And later, the religious editor at the Washington Post. Was also noted as a theologian and very active in St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Washington, a very progressive one that held rock services, ordained female priests, and sanctioned same-sex marriages as early as the 60s. Wow. They were involved with all kinds of protests in the Vietnam era, and the McKays would often put up visiting demonstrators, mostly hippie kids. His upbringing may be why, although McKay had a staunch anti-establishment stance, his most deeply held ideals had strong connections to the best aspects of Christian morality. Ian's not a religious person, says Mark Sullivan, but he behaves like one. There's a song they had called Out of Step early on in, I think it was on the In My Eyes 4-song EP from August 81, I think, the title track. It says, had a regulation hardcore chorus, but the verses were an innovation. They slowed down to a mere Sex Pistolian velocity. In the already heterodox world of hardcore, something like that was, as Mackay puts it, a real break. In the song, Mackay restates the straight edge ethos, alienating his delivery from line to line, mockingly stating, you tell me you like the taste, then screaming, you just need an excuse. The band is right behind him every step of the way, dropping out only as Mackay angrily demands, what the fuck have you done? More than just an accusation leveled at the object of the song's wrath, it was a challenge to anyone within earshot. Out of Step is an excellent example of the way Mackay would sing against the beat. As he bellows the chorus line, out of step with the world, he's singing in a different meter than the band, making him literally out of step with the music. But the song was far more important for its lyrics, which Mackay refined the ideas first brought up in Straight Edge. The reason he's out of step with the world. Don't smoke, don't drink, don't fuck. Of course, what it all boils down to is sex, Mackay opined in a 1983 interview. It's all a social thing, and for people to loosen up, drink a little alcohol, loosen up their sexual organs or whatever, to get the nerve to do what everyone wants to do anyway. It seems pretty stupid. You've opened a Pandora's box of talk. I could go on all day about it. Later on, in a Maximum Rock and Roll interview, he felt the need to pronounce himself not asexual. The don't fuck line, he stated, referred to an uncaring conquestual sex. Conquestual sex. Say that 5 times. No, don't. It will sound gross. He said it was people whose whole being is about getting laid. So all their issues, everything that's important, like friendships, other people's feelings, are secondary. On television, kids see people every night going off with different people, and these characters never have any of the real-life problems that occur, like pregnancy, VD, etc. It's always clean. It is a myth. It is wrong, and a lot of people get caught up in the fantasy. And then there's a kind of a nice little exploration of how things worked within Minor Threat, attitude-wise, policy-wise, when it came to this perception of all of them not just being straight edge, but like the point of being straight edge was telling other people how to live their life. That kind of that contributed to a negative backlash against them in the scene. And the other band members that weren't singing didn't like bearing the brunt of that for something they hadn't written lyrically. So when it came to the lyrics of Out of Step, don't smoke, don't drink, don't fuck lines, there was a conversation about it and an argument about it, and it gets more and more heated. And then apparently Nelson finally blurts out at me, and you don't do these things, but I might want to. And then Mackay ran upstairs into this is the Discord house. I assume they're arguing in, and he kicked a hole in Nelson's door. And that's when it dawned on me what the argument was really about, says Mackay. It wasn't so much about what other people were thinking. It was because the people in the band were starting to feel hemmed in by my aesthetic. Mackay understood their position, and yet he also felt a little betrayed. I I really wanted to feel we were all together on things. But I understood their point. And so as a compromise, he allowed the letter I to be printed in parentheses in front of the lyrics. Now I'll touch on a song that's going to be discussed elsewhere in this episode, either before or after this, Guilty of Being White. It was apparently inspired by his experiences at Washington, D.C.'s Wilson High, which was about 70% black, and him and his friends getting picked on by black kids on a regular basis, feeling like or being told they were getting punished for everything from black poverty to the death of Martin Luther King. But, to him, that song at the time and in later days seemed clear that it was anti-racist. Ian says, of course, it didn't occur to me at the time that I wrote it that anybody outside my 20 or 30 friends who I was singing them to would ever actually ponder the lyrics or even consider them. Michael Azarad goes on to say that suspicions of racism, although unfounded, were only bolstered by Mackay's shaved head, which duplicated the look of the skinheads. Original skinheads began in England in the mid-'60s and were multiracial, working-class hippie haters. But within a decade, racist organizations such as England's National Front had co-opted the look. Reactionary nationalist punk rock bands had exported it to the U.S., where it took hold among the more benighted strata of white American youth. But as Mackay says, his look had everything to do with the fact that he had curly hair and couldn't spike it properly. He envied his brother and his friends who could go to Georgetown and instantly attract abuse simply by virtue of their vertical hairdos. So I looked up a few articles focused around the whole obscenity trial with Frankenchrist. I don't want to expand on that because my good friend Ryan Scott, the way he told me the story was, it's not just that they had to go to court. It's that, Jello Biafra's home was raided. And there's the whole Tipper Gore PMRC era. If you don't know anything about that, you'll have to get into it on your own. But I guess Dead Kennedys were lumped in with all the filthy 15 list of artists that were under fire on a national stage in our nation's capital. There were hearings about this sort of thing. So it says in Diffuser, the Dead Kennedys weren't on the PMRC's original Filthy 15 list, although Prince, Black Sabbath, AC/DC, Twisted Sister, and even Def Leppard were. But when Biafra's home was raided as a result of the poster's presence in Frankenchrist, he was certain that Tipper Gore's organization was somewhere behind the move. The story went that a 14-year-old girl had bought a copy of Frankenchrist for her 11-year-old brother. On opening it when she got home, she'd seen the Giger artwork, and her mother had contacted the authorities, who sent the police around. Biafra recalled being asked, "Where's the guy who did this?" and telling officers, "He's in Switzerland." Then he remembered being asked, "What are all those pictures of missing milk carton kids doing on your wall? Do you know where they are?" He admitted, "I was scared for my life." But after 2.5 hours, they had what they wanted: 3 copies of Frankenchrist, 3 extra posters, and my private mail. He was charged with distributing harmful matter to minors, which carried a maximum sentence of $2,000 and a year in jail. He was certain that it was expected he'd plead guilty for financial reasons, and that was the whole idea. It would have been too expensive to chase a big-name artist with access to record label bank accounts, he argued. They deliberately picked an independent instead of a high-budget PMRC target like Prince or Ozzy Osbourne, he said, adding that when officials spoke of sending a message, the message was, "Blackball Dead Kennedys McCarthy style. Don't let anyone have access to their records." So it took 18 months for the case to be called in L.A. Biafra arrives in court August 1987. The unofficial band had nearly bankrupted his Alternative Tentacles label. The band had split partly as a result of the pressure, and he'd had to create the No More Censorship Defense Fund to bankroll the upcoming legal fight. Because, of course, he was going to fight. On top of all that, he noted, 3 weeks in Los Angeles is cruel and unusual punishment for anyone. The defense lawyers found themselves facing young attorney Michael Garino, who was determined to make a name for himself during the high-profile proceedings. The early stages saw charges being dropped against the 67-year-old man who ran the pressing plant where Frankenchrist had been assembled. Jesus fuck. And who was now too ill to attend court. Also dropped were the charges against the distribution company, which had gone bankrupt in the interim. Our case was one of a half dozen designed to bend the law so that anyone in the distribution chain could be prosecuted for obscenity, said Biafra. Up until now, Supreme Court had only upheld hands-on distributors, people at the cash register who sell Hustler to a 17-year-old. The way they want to set it up now is that anyone within sniffing distance can get convicted. He cited the example of a pornographic movie he had heard about called Backside to the Future. Everyone, even slightly involved, face the prospect of 3 years in jail. Somebody who runs out to get coffee for the director might get busted. How can I make an album if they're all too afraid to work with me because they might get busted? The defense took the opportunity of selecting a jury to make points that they knew couldn't be made from the witness box. When one juror was asked, "What does punk mean to you?" he replied, "Anarchy." Biafra was horrified, but then understood the thinking when the next question was, "What does anarchy mean?" And the answer was, concerned young people who want to do something about our apathetic society. He was impressed. Oh, he was less impressed at the juror who, when asked if there's any reason he couldn't serve impartially, said, "Yeah, all cops are liars." Oh, boy. So there's another element to this whole suing the dead Kennedys thing. When Jell-O chose to use the image for the cover of Frankenchrist originally, the Giger poster, other guys in the band weren't really happy about that. And they were going to... They got permission from Giger to use the image for a pretty small fee. So I think Jell-O was stoked about that. The other guys, not so much. They seemed to think that having that kind of a pornographic album cover would be a bad idea. More trouble than it was worth. So it was like a big compromise that they would put it inside as a poster and then on the outside use an image of the Shriners Parade and a warning message about the poster inside the sleeve that said, "Some people may find it shocking, repulsive, or offensive. Life can sometimes be that way." So besides the obscenity part of the lawsuit, there was another legal nightmare because the members of the Shriners that were pictured on the album cover eventually sued Biafra and Alternative Tentacles for using their image without permission. I mean, you know... I would assume if they hadn't had the first lawsuit, those old Shriners never would have been made aware of the album. But then once their image is linked with an obscenity trial, then they have, legal recourse. I could see. Not that I make excuses for it or admire it, but I would, I assume it was just the entrepreneurial spirit of some lawyers in the area or some legal firm or other going, hey. Now there's money to be made, perhaps, but I don't know that you're really going to squeeze a whole lot out of Alternative Tentacles. At that point, maybe they did. I don't know. Maybe they settled. So the result, anyway, there was a hung jury, split 7-5 in favor of acquittal. The DA, Michael Gurino, and Ira Rayner made a motion for retrial, which was denied by the judge. And that's a superior judge for the county of Los Angeles. The album, however, was banned from any record stores nationwide as a result. You can watch footage of Jell-O on the Oprah Winfrey Show from that year or the year after, right sitting alongside Tipper Gore when they argue about this whole thing on the issues of controversial music lyrics and censorship. If you want, it's out there. Final words I want to put into this part are also from the Diffuser article that I started with in this segment. Jell-O Biafra, let's see, says the most distressing moment came when one of the cops who'd raided his home gave evidence. He says, Officer Friendly tried to paint a picture whereby I'd welcome them in, even though they'd busted the window by the front door and let themselves in. And how I'd said, ha, 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 it must be that Giger poster you're looking for. I knew how obscene that was. It corrupts little kids. That broke my heart. It didn't just make me mad. I have a cynical view of the way the world is run, but to see an officer of the law lie on a witness stand, that broke my heart. And I'm sure plenty of people listening to this are like, oh, what do you expect them to do? That's what they always do. Yeah, we know. That's part of their whole thing. If you've ever been detained by the police and read a report of what happened afterwards. As my very good friend, John Drenning, the former public defender for the city of Seattle for many years, will tell you, you're going to see a copy of the police report eventually. And don't be surprised when nothing you read makes any sense or is relatable in your memory as actual events or things you said. That's what they do so that you have to plea things down from many, many, many steps back. Those last bits were my words. I have to admit, but that's the implication. They do that to keep things, keep you on your back feet. So, what I think he's really saying is not so much that a cop would lie; it's that a cop would unnecessarily make it appear that Jello was gleefully trying to corrupt young people when that didn't even, you don't have to do that. You can just stick with the facts. You're on the stand. Anyway. And in 1997, Jello tells MTV, I think they assumed I was some Sid Vicious idiot who would plead guilty and pay a $50 fine. Then they could use that precedent against major label artists. Yeah, that's how they do this kind of thing legally. They get an easy target, and then they can use that against a larger portion of the industry. As some of us are seeing now, possibly playing out before us with the large television companies and media companies that want to give in and pay a lot of money so they can have their billion-dollar mergers. Anyway, too much to get into, and someone may not even care later. Oh, my neighbors. Maybe you can hear them, maybe you can't. But he says the DA Garino later admitted he had known he was on the wrong side of history during the trial. He says about midway through, we realized the lyrics of the album were in many ways socially responsible. They're very anti-drug and pro-individual, he said in 1997, saying that he and his assistant were a couple of young prima donna prosecutors. Did we win, Biafra wondered in 1989? The battle, but not the war. The war is getting worse. Watch what the religious right tries to do to your schools. Watch them trying to shut down cool record stores or cool college radio stations. And as Frank Zappa puts it, don't let them govern by telling people what they don't like. Go out and tell them what you do like. So, 1991, Lombardo is not doing well. There's this whole chunk of the story where he's annoyed that for a long time he's been so low and physically low down. People aren't paying attention to him or seeing him. So Rick Rubin suggests they put, a drum riser up on stage so he can be higher up. And then he says he's still not high enough. And Rick Rubin says, well, your head's not poking out of the top. You should set your drum stool higher. And that affects his feet. His feet are now not at the same position as they used to be, and he's not as accurate and smooth and effective on the double kick rolls that he's doing, the intro to, I guess, specifically Angel of Death. Doesn't sound as good as it used to. And Kerry King is like, well, he's lost it. He's lost his feet. He can't play anymore. They didn't really attribute it to anything technical as far as the setup, and having his own drum tech for the first time consistently for a while now at that point, and not tending to his own gear anymore. It just wasn't I guess no one sort of connected those dots and realized it was like a gear and a physicality issue. They were already kind of done with him and his attitude by the time anyone sort of put those elements together. So they get an offer to play Monsters of Rock in late 92, I think, August 22nd. But Dave and Teresa's first child was due in late September of that year, and Lombardo tells the group that he can't play shows around that due date. So when they get the invite to play Donington, Kerry King's not going to pass that up. It was one where Iron Maiden was the headliner, Skid Row was playing second, Slayer, Thunder, and Wasp in that order split the poster's third line, says Mr. Ferris in his book. And the group had taken off all year, so 8 European festivals in August were the band's only shows slated for the entire year, and thus their only major chance to get out and make some money. The dates were scheduled. As they rehearsed for the shows, the atmosphere at practices was tense. When and if the band showed up, that is. They're playing in Anaheim, and they're rehearsing the next set of shows. Dave Lombardo would be the first one to show up at practice, and Araya, Henneman, and King had a custom where they would kind of pre-funk at TGI Fridays, which apparently Jeff Hanneman loved. Araya recalls it being Chili's. The pregame ritual, it says, often ran into overtime with the Slayer frontline drinking, laughing, and having a good time while Lombardo sat at the practice space, waiting and fuming, generally doing nothing, while his pregnant wife sat at home without him. One night in the practice spot, sitting alone long after the scheduled start time, Lombardo left the kit and stormed to the restaurant. Sure enough, the rest of the band were there in a row at the bar. Drummer walked in and zoomed up to his bandmates. Araya recalled the scene. Lombardo pointed at Hanneman and there's a typo here. It says Lombardo pointed at Hanneman and Lombardo. I mean, it said all three, so I assume all the guys. Like a dad who caught his twin sons raiding the family liquor cabinet, Lombardo aimed a finger at each of them in turn. You and you, he said, I want to talk to you outside. King, Hanneman, and Araya exchanged looks. The guitarists, okay, it's the two guitar players, rose from their bar stools and followed Lombardo outside. Araya remained at the bar, watching the rest of the band talk in the parking lot. Animated and agitated, Lombardo was ranting at Hanneman and King, waving his finger and bitching them out. The angrier Lombardo got, the closer he moved toward them. Man, I better get out there, see what the fuck's going on, Araya thought, as Lombardo inched into arm's length. The singer scurried outside before somebody punched somebody. Outside, the dialogue was even hotter than it seemed from the bar. The singer who had voiced Hanneman's most unspeakable ideas dropped his jaw in disbelief when he heard the exchange. Lombardo was fucking pissed, and he wasn't holding back. As Araya watched, Lombardo delivered the guitarist a riot act that was 10 years in the making. Araya diplomatically declines to recreate the exact dialogue, but he says it was about the band's co-captains being a couple of stubborn moron chuckleheads. The outburst was a blindside out of the black, and it wasn't a complete surprise. But it wasn't a complete surprise. Tension had been high in the group. Araya envisioned some kind of scenario where Lombardo would confront King and Hanneman, but he never imagined this kind of venomous, soul-bearing assault. Araya interrupted Lombardo's flow. I can't believe you're saying these things, Dave, said Araya. Araya looked at King and Hanneman. King looked at Araya. Hanneman looked at Araya. Hanneman looked at Lombardo. Hanneman looked at Araya. Tom, man, said Hanneman, his surfer-like cool dangerously close to a critical fail. You better talk to your boy. Araya thought about it for a moment, then the singer decided the time to talk was over. Man, I ain't talking to him anymore, said Araya. Later, Dave. Araya, Hanneman, and King turned around and walked away from Lombardo. As they stormed off, a stunned Araya tried to figure out what had just happened. Dude, what was he screaming about before I was here, the singer asked. After all the years, maybe I've got it mixed up, but it threw me for a loop, explained Araya. I wasn't expecting that. He was upset about rehearsal, but he said a lot of other things that should have been unsaid because they were said in the heat of the moment. Okay, so this is interesting to me because my memory from back in the 90s was that the story involved Dave Lombardo not showing up at Donington, not that he didn't want to go. The end result of this exchange, as far as this book, Mr. Ferris's book, is concerned, is that the band split with him right then and there. They hired Paul Bostaph from the other Bay Area, another Bay Area band called Forbidden. I think most of the Slayer shows I saw were with Paul Bostaph over the course of a decade or so. Guy's great. I think he's more precise than Dave, and I'm sure he makes for a better employee, touring partner than a guy that they've known since they were young and they have a lot of problems with. But not as creative as Lombardo, in my opinion. What are you going to do? But I'm curious if the guys in the band that were dictating sort of the narrative after Dave was gone wanted to make it seem a little bit more like he had left them high and dry, and that's why like they had played the show with Paul Bostaff knowing that Dave might not show up, or he pulled something at the last minute. Also, it's entirely possible that I misremembered that from many, many years ago. Who knows? But I wanted to cover, the first 2 times Dave Lombardo left or was, severed from Slayer. I think there's plenty of documentation about the later stuff. It has to do with management and money and a lot of questions about where things are going. A lot of write-offs that aren't accounted for apparently, and it got really pretty acrimonious. And they sang about it on Repentless in the song "You Against You." Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Director Talk on a history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. We're going to delve into a Q&A with the director of Green Room, Jeremy Saulnier. Building on the conversations that we've already sort of explored in the previous 2 interview segments. I guess when they say it like that, it sounds like it's my interview segment. Conducted by me. Clearly it is not. Just reading from a 10-year-old Q&A from letterboxd.com. And if you know movies, you already know Letterboxd. And I'm saying Letterboxd because there's no E before the D after X. Nothing to do with ED, these folks, I guess. Wish I could say the same. Because ED stands for erectile dysfunction. Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole thing because it delves into all kinds of stuff in his career, which if you're a fan of his and you want to watch the rest of his movies, check it out. Letterboxd.com. Section is called Journal. It's the Jeremy Saulnier Q&A or Saulnier Q&A. But a large chunk of this is about Green Room. And I want to read the things that he has to say without trotting over too much of the exact same ground, but some of it will be similar, and he has another sort of way of telling the same story or expanding on it. Someone asks, I saw your film on opening night and loved it. How did you perfectly visualize the crowd and concert scenes of the film? Did you do some research by going to concerts? Do you play in a band? Well, we know the answer already is yes, he has played in bands. He says, thanks. The concert scenes were among the very few in Green Room where we employed 2 cameras. To technically pull that off, we had to wrangle almost 100 people. I wasn't laughing at the using 2 cameras. I'm laughing about what he's going to have to explain here. Had to wrangle 100 people and capture as rowdy a show as we could, which is very difficult on a union film in North America. And I think by that he means, you need scheduled break times, and you lose momentum, you lose the energy fast. You got to wrangle, you got to command a lot of people that aren't on your payroll normally. They're not actors. You need to get them in the vibe, in the spirit of the thing of being at a punk show, and you have to correct people who maybe aren't acting right or believably. Maybe they're overdoing it. Maybe they're underdoing it, depending on what they think a punk audience is supposed to be. These are all thoughts that I'm just having based on the 2 sentences I just read. He says, yes, I had grown up in the punk hardcore scene in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and have been in a band in high school. Many of my friends are still in bands and have toured the States. So I went to a few of their shows, interviewed them about being on the road and dynamics between band members. Next question is about there being anything innately political about Green Room. I think in any other episode, no, not any other episode. I've obviously done some politically oriented episodes of this show, of a history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll in the past. And in a lot of other episodes, I would say, hey, if you're not into politics, this might not be what you want to hear, but it's important to getting the message of the filmmaker across. But if you clicked on this, this episode, you probably like Dead Kennedys or Minor Threat and already like the movie Green Room, and you're not going to be shocked and appalled and surprised by the fact that we're going to talk about politics here. So again, this is from the movie came out in 2015. This interview is from the year after that. He says, yes, lots of political undertones. Are they undertones? I think they're just tones. Myself, me, Jay Smith. Lots of political undertones when I wrote it in 2013-14. But I couldn't predict how relevant it would become in 2016. Oh, just wait, buddy. Ugh, he says. My statement wasn't the obvious Nazis are bad. It was more about loosely paralleling mainstream American conservative power structure in Darcy's gang. I didn't read that incorrectly. There's a missing I think, in the text. The elite few at the top give marching orders to those beneath them, using ideology and misinformation to cause division and animosity between those who are fighting the fight, but unwittingly are serving interests other than their own. But that's all underneath. It's really just it's tragic, hyper-violent punk rock shit. Show. Let's take two. Let's do take two. It's really just a tragic, hyper-violent punk rock shit show and an exercise in tension building. Use take two, please. What amazed me most about Green Room is the next question, is how authentic the members of the band felt. I bought all of them as punk kids. Did you put the actors through some form of punk rock education, period, before shooting? He says, the characters were mostly based on people I knew growing up in the punk and hardcore scene. There's a real Sam, Tiger, and Tad. We know this from the previous segment we had read from. Luckily, Anton, Pat, and Aliyah, Sam, had experience playing in bands, but Callum, Tiger, and Joe, Reese, had zero experience. We pre-recorded the Ain't Rights songs and let them listen to it across the Atlantic. Callum and Joe were UK-based. Once on the set in Portland, Oregon, we had a crash course for the band so they could play live and come off as authentic. It was trial by fire for Callum, who had to perform his first on-camera show at the Mexican restaurant 9 hours after he arrived in the States. Someone talks about how much the movie resonates with him and many others in his punk rock and hardcore community. Had a sincere authenticity to the source material. I've seen pictures of you on set in a sheer terror shirt, so I must ask if the story of Green Room, even small portions, was at all inspired by the experiences on the road by either yourself or others you know in the punk and hardcore scene? Absolutely. My band never toured, but a lot of my friends' bands did. I used a lot of their stories for the film, including the opening scene where the driver dozed off behind the wheel and woke up on the side of the road. I was in the scene in the 90s, and there were Nazi skinheads at most of the shows. Lots of parallels to my personal experience, including the soundtrack. Many of the songs I grew up listening to made it into the film, including 2 Ain't Rights songs that were written by my high school buddies in the 90s. He got his friends a payday. Good for him. Questions asked about that freaky effect with Yelchin's arm and how realistic it was. He says it was a totally practical effect, just good old-fashioned and well-placed prosthetic with hidden blood tubes. Anton and I worked on increasing flexibility in his wrist so he could dangle his hand as if his tendons were severed. It totally sold the gag. They ask about the screenwriting process. We've covered that already. Then comparisons to Blue Ruin, if you want to go back and read this article. Big fan. Here's another one. How did the final dog scene in Green Room come to your mind? It seems so out of the blue, but awesomely subverts a classic trope. Thanks. The final dog scene in Green Room just came naturally as I wrote the film. I'd done a lot of research on pit bulls and fighting dogs, and it became clear how misrepresented fighting breeds are as depicted in films. I played that angle up for most of the film, yet felt it important to reveal the true nature of pit bulls as a nice little button at the end. It also helped to offset all the goddamn carnage. What's the best anecdote you can remember when you were filming Green Room? The pit bulls, the gore and the blood, the stunts, the shout outs, and the pyro effects all went more or less according to plan. But often taking less time than we allocated to shoot intense action scenes. But we lost an important scene because we got bogged down shooting a fucking insert of a knife landing on the dirt. Inserts are the worst. How did you manage to convince Slayer to allow the use of their music in this film as well as Dead Kennedys, etc.? We were lucky in that respect. Nazi Punk's Fuck Off was the only song actually written into the script, so that was cleared before we shot. Slayer, Napalm Death, Midnight, etc. were all supportive of the film and were eager to see this scene portrayed on screen with authenticity, energy, and respect. Plus, we paid them. Still, I mean, there's plenty of bands that would say, I don't care if you're paying us. We don't need to fucking help you sell your movie that's about Nazis that like our band. You know, they could have said no. So someone brings up the nothing sticker on the van, that Ain't Rights are driving. And he says, the nothing sticker was one of many that we received permission to use as props. I had not known much about the band. I've been out of the scene for well over a decade, but have since become familiar with them. They kindly showed up to one of the Green Room screenings in New York City and handed me a vinyl album. Oh, that's nice. How hard was it to choose the specifics for things like the record that is stolen, the collection of stickers in the van, the sticker for the band? Nothing made me gasp in the theater more than anything else. Thank you for that great work. He said, glad you connected with such a detail. There's so many details in this film, but I hope they add up for people in this scene. It's in the scene, meaning the music scene, not the scene in the movie. It's a rare one. It's rare one finds a movie that seems custom made just for you. That was the effect I was going for. I licensed a Fear song just to incorporate Lee Ving's signature 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or the probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 count off for all the peeps that would get it. Nice. What did you think of Bobby Burns' 70s Grindhouse edit of your Green Room trailer? That's kind of cool. I might want to check that out. It says, it was rad. The fact that my work was getting the fan art treatment is a huge honor. What was it like working with Patrick Stewart? Sir Patrick was great, dedicated, kind, and humble. Was shocked he came aboard this film, but in retrospect, he was the only choice to play Darcy. Someone refers to it as one of this year's best films and the best horror movie in ages. Felt like a modern Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Has Tobe Hooper influenced the film, or you, or is this all just my imagination? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre has certainly influenced me as a filmmaker, and I certainly see some parallels, but it wasn't a primary reference for Green Room. Perhaps subconsciously, my main reference was Straw Dogs, and that was the only film I watched and broke down before I wrote the script. Someone points out there's a Dragonlance book in the van in the movie. Who's your favorite character in the Dragonlance series, and which is your favorite book? We put that there for the fellow nerds. I actually wasn't that into the series. I was more into skateboarding and playing D&D or AD&D. Macon Blair was more the Dragonlance guy. Hold on, I'll text him. Macon Blair, Tasselhoff Burfoot character, Dragons of Autumn Twilight book. So great. I have already read this, but it's been a couple weeks since I did the research. I forgot about that part. Then it says, brackets, an hour later, but upon further reflection, Tasselhoff was my favorite main character, especially when I was young. But Lord Soth, the Death Knight, is probably the coolest supporting character. Much more metal. Kind of a ripoff of the ring wraiths from Lord of the Rings, but still very badass. Someone asks about working with A24, the distribution company. He said, they have been a wonderful distribution partner, great people. They're building an amazing brand. Now, this is 10 years ago. There's a lot that's changed since then. People might have other opinions. These are my words, not his.
We couldn't guess.
They take great care of their filmmakers, and I'm developing my next project with them now.
The dead air.
Let's see.
That's always good. What now?
He talks about, Blue Ruin.
Yeah.
Can we get Ain't Rights merch? Yes, he says. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, good one.
And I think
my
last portion of this that I'll read for now is a very simple question.
Is it?
What's your desert island band? Black Sabbath. Good on you, Jeremy. Sabbath rules. All right.
Can't argue with that. Rest in peace, Ozzy.
Please
remember to replace the speaker on the post when you leave the theater.
All right, I want to read some segments of an article from Entertainment Weekly. There's an interview with a guy named Glenn E. Friedman, who put out a book of minor threat photographs that he himself photographed. And it's called Minor Threat. Let's see. Oh, the stories behind new, never-before-seen minor threat photos.
Ah, catchy.
It's called Just a Minor Threat.
Ah.
The book. This is an interview
Finishing
by Dalton
strong,
Ross
are
from
we?
September 2023, if you want to find it on entertainmentweekly.com,
Nope.
the books section.
Not gonna.
I want to touch on a few of the conversations in here about certain events that seemed really interesting to me. It talks about how he started snapping pictures of the Dogtown skateboarding scene when he was a teenager in the 70s, getting up close to the airborne action taking place in the emptied-out swimming pools of Southern California. He would go on to take photos of California bands like Black Flag, The Germs, Dead Kennedys, and Circle Jerks. And then move on to the 80s New York rap scene, shooting LL Cool J, Run DMC, Beastie Boys, and apparently the cover of It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy. So, hot damn. That's very cool.
Yes, it is, but not because you
One
said
of
so.
the photographs is from the Barn, July 3rd, 1982, of Lyle Preslar on stage playing his Gibson Les Paul guitar, and his it's a great shot. You can see Ian singing behind him. He talks about this show as like a hydrogen bomb going off in a city. It was his first time seeing Minor Threat live, July 3rd, 82, at the Barn in Alpine Village,
Not the barn in Alpine Village.
Torrance, California.
The Torrance, California.
I'd been hearing the records for a little more than a year, but the way they came out on stage and the way the song sounded live, it was obviously another experience.
It was better.
You don't know the personalities until you see them.
No, you
could hear it in the music, but there was no seeing it yet. Right. There were no videos to watch ahead of time, so it was absolutely thrilling and inspiring. So inspiring that Friedman shot 2 rolls of film instead of just one. And one of those shots, never seen before, is of guitarist Lyle Preslar seemingly turning his wrath on someone? I have no idea what's going on there, says Friedman. It was a very chaotic show, so maybe he was mad at someone for slamming into him while he was playing, or the security for allowing someone to slam into him, or someone unplugged his guitar while he was playing. Or Brian was not keeping up. You can't really tell. Regardless, it's a great window into the passion and havoc of a Minor Threat show. Lyle was a perfectionist, says Friedman. I think he just wanted things to be a certain way, and at a show you often can't control that.
No, you can't control, unless it's a show like this when you could, but you don't. You just,
and he is expressing his disappointment or bewilderment that everyone isn't following what he thinks should be happening. And so he's just like, what the fuck? As for what Preslar was actually yelling about in the photo, not even the subject knows for sure. Either I'm screaming a line from In My Eyes, or I'm dismayed because the band, by the band because I'm looking in their direction, the guitarist tells Entertainment Weekly. I'd like to think it was the former. Either way, it's yet another example of Glenn's ability to get a 1 in a million shot. It's a great, yeah. Like, he's got his guitar on, but he's not playing it. Like, his arm is out.
It's out, you say.
Oh, he's got a pick he's holding.
Oh.
He's definitely screaming something at somebody.
Okay.
But it does look like a very, like, hey, I'm walking here kind of body language. Like, what are you doing?
That's a helpful interpretation.
The next one is from the 930 Club, August 1st, 1982.
I remember this.
It says, this shot of Ian Mackay was taken at the original 930 Club.
Oh, maybe I don't.
In Washington, D.C. How was seeing the punk outfit in their hometown different from other gigs? As communal as the band always was, they were even more so at home because everybody knew them and had grown up with them, recalls Friedman. The whole situation just seemed more relaxed and more comfortable. Not that it wasn't completely intense and chaotic as usual, but it was their club, their own stomping grounds. There was just a comfort level there where there was less pressure than when they played in New York or Los Angeles. To get the best shots in such a constantly shifting scene, Friedman fell back on his roots in the medium. Much like skateboarding, I just try to get as close to the action as possible, whether it's in front of the stage or on the stage. I get as close to the subjects as I can and still see the environment they're in. His previously unreleased shot of Mackay above shows the singer in his element as to how the frontman compares to his childhood friend and fellow hardcore legend Henry Rollins of Black Flag, Friedman says, it's apples and oranges, right? Henry is very introverted, very intense, very strong, very menacing. Ian is also very strong, but he's more about sharing.
Sharing is caring.
More about being with the people and the crowd. They just speak in different languages and are great in different ways.
Diplomatic. Yes,
Next one is CBGB, December 18.
Oh, CBGB, I've heard of that.
Apparently this famous show almost didn't happen because their van broke down on the way to New York.
Wow.
And they were late to the gig.
Oof.
Only after Friedman and others pleaded to the club did the show go on. Time was running out on the clock, recalls Friedman.
Them.
They weren't going to not let the band play because they weren't there on time. They weren't going to not let the band. I think that's a typo.
You could have edited this.
But they finally got there, and we had made the case that you have to let the band go and play at least 15 minutes. Otherwise, everyone's going to fucking tear this place down. The club relented and chaos of another sort erupted. Once Minor Threat was playing, there was such a force you couldn't stop it. They let the show go on, and they played for about half an hour when we thought they were only going to get 15 minutes just to calm everyone from destroying the place. But they played a phenomenal show. There's a shot of the band in L.A., April 1983. He says, I have no idea why we did it. I have no idea why I used a fisheye lens that day, but we managed to get a couple of cool shots. There's a little more personality in some of them, and goofiness. They're not just super hard, and it's a little more personable. The band is sort of standing outside. It might be like a 1 hour. Oh, it's a 1 hour photo booth. Most of them are standing up. Ian MacKaye is sitting in the foreground. And it says, these pictures also feature the addition of new bassist Steve Hansgen, with Brian Baker moving to second guitar. Friedman says, Black Flag had 2 guitarists at the time, and once Black Flag put in 2 guitars, it was kind of a trend. We all know that Brian was originally a guitar player, and he just switched to bass for the band. It was kind of a thing at the time to get more power. Everyone wanted to do it. It turned out that most of them, after a year or 2, went back to 1 guitar. And they eventually lose Hansgen and opted for the original 4-person lineup. Steve, being in the band, definitely lent more power to the live show, says Friedman. He brought a lot of energy, and that was great, but they didn't need it. They already had it. He fit in, and it worked for the time he was there. But then they realized it wasn't necessary and went back to what they were doing. And then the last one I'll read from is a picture out front of the Discord house, August 2nd, 83. This is a shot from the same roll that has the famous, image. I think it's referred to as the Salad Days image of them sitting on the porch of their house with a dog close by. This is from a little farther away in a different angle entirely. It says, Friedman's famous Salad Days shot was snapped August 2nd, 83 at the Discord house. I was very inspired by the communal aspect of that group house, says the photographer. I'd never lived in a group house myself, and it was a new concept to me, and I just thought it was really cool the way everyone gathered around this place and hung out there. I slept on the couch and woke up in the morning to everyone dancing and being goofy and putting on a show with broomsticks. Plenty of other pictures taken that day appear in Friedman's new book, including the shot above with one of the band's canine fans. The one of the dog is basically us goofing around, he says. I'm always trying to get that moment where the composition and the character are perfect, but the one with the dog, it's not perfect at all. There is some personality in it, and that's cool, but it's a relatively ugly picture as far as I'm concerned. If you were a documentarian, that'd be a great picture, but that's not what I do, so that's why no one saw it. Hey, let's do another Dead Kennedys segment. I want to read from a Medium article written by a gal named Amy Linden. Came out in 2015. Highway to Hell, My Life on the Road with the Dead Kennedys. It's 1981. She has moved back to New York City after 4 years living in San Francisco. She was 22. So that means she had moved to San Francisco when she was 18, I guess. A childhood friend and I shared a 2-bedroom apartment, rent $300 and change on East 4th Street, just off Avenue A, kitty corner to the building where Madonna lived, back before she actually was Madonna. Side note, I keep meaning to figure out what Madonna movie I want to cover. Maybe I'll do a couple of them. I don't really know much about Madonna, except for what I read in Nile Rodgers' autobiography, which, it's pretty cool. Business, music-y stuff, production stuff. But she had a slew of films in the 80s. like Who's That Girl and Desperately Seeking Susan. Slew. I don't know if that's a slew. She got more and more famous and then did higher profile movies like, Dick Tracy and stuff. And then there was some sexy movie with James Woods, Body of Evidence, I think is what it was called. Anyway, that's a possibility someday, just so you know. Don't be surprised. But that was before all the weirdness on archive.org, because I bookmarked a whole bunch of cheesy-looking Madonna autobiographies, or biographies from the 80s and 90s on archive.org. I was curious to check into. Anyhow, back to the article. Let's see. During my last 18 months in San Francisco, Klaus, bass player for Dead Kennedys, his girlfriend, 3 other roommates, my boyfriend / we got married for his green card husband, and I shared a huge flat in the Mission District. I wasn't as close to the other members as I was to Klaus. I had spent a decent amount of time with Darren, a.k.a. D.H. Peligro, East Bay Ray, and the inimitable Agillo Biafra. It was great to hear from Klaus, especially since he had good news. The Dead Kennedys were embarking on their first East Coast tour. "We're coming to New York," Klaus exclaimed. "You should come out on the road with us, and why not? I could drink all the band's beer. I could go backstage, and most of all, I could meet cute punk rock boys." Luckily, I didn't have to worry about giving my boss notice because I barely had a job. After arriving in NYC, the band took the Amtrak down to Washington, D.C., where the mini-tour was going to kick off. On the ride down, Klaus raised the possibility of my helping out in some way. Maybe I could write up set lists, maybe arrange the guest list, maybe help move equipment, or maybe I could get up on stage and do security, which consisted of grabbing the mic back whenever singer Jello Biafra propelled himself into the audience, keeping the flow of stage divers moving at a brisk pace, and tossing, or more specifically, shoving anyone who climbed up on stage and showed a little inclination to move. That I was totally ill-suited to do security for anyone at any time, least of all for a high-energy, aggressive band with high-energy, aggressive fans, should have been obvious. Clearly none of this mattered. Just like that, I was on stage at the legendary 930 Club, wearing a short kilt, beat-up cowboy boots, and bandanas wrapped around my wrists, looking out at a packed house of pumped-up fans, trying my best to look butch. Pushing sweat-soaked 20-year-olds off the stage was not my idea of meeting cute punk rock guys. Arguably, punk rock's birthplace was New York. However, in '81, D.C. was the epicenter of the East Coast hardcore scene, with much of the momentum coming from a tight-knit, committed crew, many just out of their teens or still living at home, who adhered to a DIY philosophy / lifestyle known as straight edge. Being down with straight edge meant just saying no to liquor, cigarettes, and drugs, which at the time were 3 of my 4 basic food groups. The leading lights of the straight edge crew were Ian MacKaye and Henry Garfield. Ian's resume included Teen Idols, Minor Threat, and later Fugazi, in addition to founding the influential indie label Discord Records. Garfield, who worked at a Haagen-Dazs in Georgetown, was the frontman for SOA. In time, he would change his surname to Rollins, join Black Flag, and become a heavily tattooed singer / spoken word artist and actor. Henry and Ian looked a bit scary, but like most of the DC crew, were as sweet and courteous as their music was aggressive. When they weren't following me around like I was Bo Peep and they were lost skinhead sheep, Henry and Ian took it upon themselves to protect me from whatever it was they thought I needed to be protected from. By the time the Dead Kennedys finished up the first of 2 DC shows, I was a cross between Big Sister and Mascot, the affection strictly platonic. There may have been lots of unity, but not many of the DC kids were coupled up. All of the passion was directed at the cause. It was as though sex, like drugs and alcohol, indicated a lack of discipline. I remember an odd but telling conversation with Henry. He had invited his friends, the DKs, and me to his small apartment in Alexandria, Virginia. He asked me to come to the kitchen. With utmost sincerity, Henry, who was at most 2 years my junior, said that he didn't really like girls, but he liked me because to him I wasn't really a girl. If memory serves, it was then that he opened the freezer and showed me a dead rat. Touched as I was by Henry's attempt to let me into his world, I let him know that I was enough of a girl to find a ratsicle kind of gross. Bless his heart, but this whole meeting cute punk boys was clearly not in the cards. Ian, Henry, and my new skinhead besties traveled to the Baltimore show, where they stood in front of the stage, their arms reaching up towards me and saying, "Amy, dance with us." I might not have been the best security detail, but I sure was the most popular. Such displays of affection only served to make my already rocky relationship with Biafra even worse. It was bad enough that Klaus had brought me along, But to Biafra, my being serenaded undermined his punk cred. Not to mention that he had no interest in sharing the spotlight, especially with some girl in a miniskirt and cowboy boots. Oddly enough, Biafra's ire grew even more pronounced when I developed a nasty cough and took to swilling cheap, high-octane cough syrup. Convinced that I would get him sick and that my fits of coughing somehow made the band look lame, Biafra turned mean. He decided that part of my job description involved looking after the equipment, and therefore I had to sleep in the van parked on the streets of the nation's then murder capital. This edict was quickly and angrily squashed by Darren, Klaus, and guitarist East Bay Ray, who generally paid me no mind, instead concentrating on picking up women. I'm not sure if she means East Bay paid her no mind and then went on to pick up women, or all three, Darren, Klaus, and guitarist East Bay Ray. Because Klaus is her friend, supposedly. Her very, very good friend. So, I don't know. Grammar, punctuation, but someone change it for me. So then, after that, I guess Klaus and Darren chip in for the rest of the tour, so she can have a hotel room and not get in Jello's way. And he was a charismatic frontman, but Biafra's actions further convinced me that he was a dick. She was invited out on this thing by a friend, so I think it can kind of go either way. It's like I can see being annoyed that there's this person riding around on tour with you that you don't really care about if you're the singer. But if she's annoyed at everyone else's behavior or anyone else's behavior, I think that's justifiable since she was asked by a friend to come hang out like it was cool. So it says, before heading down to Charm City, we drove out to a farm in Virginia to meet the Bad Brains' explosive lead singer, H.R. The Bad Brains were and remain a sheer force of nature, but H.R. could be, shall we say, strange. His home was a punk rock crash pad / Rasta commune filled with kids, women, the other three-quarters of the Bad Brains, and the ever-present smell of weed. The Kennedys were there to finalize plans for the punk pioneers to open up at the first of 2 upcoming New York City dates. Unbeknownst to us, H.R. was in the midst of a verbal fast, something that he did to cleanse himself of negative energy. Instead of talking, he gestured wildly and occasionally scribbled down notes. Next time we saw H.R. and the Bad Brains, they came this close to blowing the Dead Kennedys off stage. In fact, they just might have done so. We encountered a bit of drama in Boston. The concert tickets and loyal advertising said DKs rather than the Dead Kennedys. Was it censorship? Maybe. It wasn't uncommon to shorten the group's name, yet it wasn't lost on anyone that the name change happened in the home of the actual Kennedys. Looking back, I think that Ray, Klaus, and Darren knew that taking umbrage over the promoter's decision was not worth the energy. But with his customary lack of concern for anything but his own agenda, Biafra became furious. Adding insult to perceived injury, Biafra began the set ranting and making snarky comments about imprisoned IRA martyr Bobby Sands, who had either just died or was dying as a result of a prolonged hunger strike. It was not one of Biafra's most sensitive moments. It was also in Boston that the band picked up Microwave, a good-natured, muscly young fan who approached them after the show. Microwave was a far better fit for tossing skinheads and guarding amps than a sleep-deprived tubercular girl. Much to Biafra's delight, Microwave took over most of the heavy lifting, literally. After 6 cities in 2 weeks, the traveling circus ended in New York City's Irving Plaza. An old Ukrainian theater, Irving Plaza was largest venue. Okay. An old Ukrainian theater, Irving Plaza was largest venue. And that night it was packed with hundreds of bodies, including DC Straight Edge Boys Choir / Amy Appreciation Society. Even though Microwave was now head punk in charge, I was in my customary spot off to the right of the bass amp, poised to help out if needed. The energy level was off the charts, and the crowd roared, sang along, and danced as the Dead Kennedys tore into songs like California Uber Alles, Kill the Poor, and Holiday in Cambodia. By now, I was so in sync with the band's rhythm that I could almost predict when Biafra would dive into the crowd. And when he did, I ran out to the front of the stage to reel him in. Suddenly, an overeager fan grabbed the mic and refused to loosen up his grip. Biafra was floating on top of a sea of bodies, and I had lost control of the mic. A tug-of-war ensued, and the next thing I knew, the fan got a hold of the mic and mic stand and clonked me. Unfortunately, I was a little drunk, having hit the end of the already frayed rope. I lost it and tried to kick the fan in the head. I don't know. That seems pretty justified, Amy. I think you're in the right there. Before I could make shoot forehead contact, my opponent put his hands around my left foot and twisted it. Microwave sprung into action, secured the stand, got the mic, and brought Biafra back to the stage as Klaus pushed me behind an amp. The skirmish took less than a minute. As soon as the show ended and the band headed to the dressing room, I became acutely aware of a nagging, swelling sensation radiating from the right side of my foot. The pain was intense, so I kept drinking in the hopes that the beer would make it all better. I didn't want to look like a baby or miss the fun. Saturday Night Live's John Belushi and Mr. Bill were there. When I was unable to move my toes, it was clear that something really bad had happened. I needed to get it checked out immediately. Ever the gentlemen, Henry and Ian, carried me 10 blocks down 14th Street to St. Vincent's Hospital and stayed in the waiting room while I was examined. By now, my foot was completely swollen, and the only way to take x-rays was to cut the boot off, which I begged the doctor not to do. Turned out that I had a severely broken left toe. I was given something a bit stronger than cough syrup, a pair of crutches, and just like that, my trip was over. The dead Kennedys went back home. I'd had fun. I was littered with bruises, but I'd had fun. I never did meet any cute punk rock boys. Ah, too bad, Amy. That was well told. I would say it reads a bit like something out of Teen Vogue, but I've never read Teen Vogue. I'm just probably grasping at straws to be snarky. Here's some more lighthearted Slayer stuff. It's a funny confluence of words to put together. I didn't know much about this era, but there was a time when they were opening for Wasp on a theater tour around the country with Raven opening the shows, playing before Slayer. Raven notoriously
It's pronounced notoriously.
Co-headlined Metallica's first national tour when they were on Megaforce Records promoting Kill 'Em All.
Notoriously.
They're from the new wave of British heavy metal. Apparently, they were still doing well in America as far as audiences go.
Everyone knows that.
This is probably. This is right after. This is right after they played those European festivals with their newest drummer. They're a guy named Scaglione. Who played with them during this little blip of time after Rain and Blood, but before Lombardo came back for South of Heaven. So apparently Blackie Lawless was brooding a lot backstage as the tour went on, and people started leaving after Slayer's set, and the theaters were only half full to begin with. He wouldn't hang out with anyone else on the tour, but other guys in Wasp did. It's noted that, Kerry King wasn't drinking much at that time, but Chris Holmes from Wasp was happy to make up the difference. If you know that scene from, the metal years of Penelope Spheris's Decline of Western Civilization, you probably, if you swam in that pool after that scene was filmed, just passively, you probably would get a DUI on the drive home. Anyway, Rick Sales, who I mentioned was tour managing Slayer, brought as much professionalism as he could. But he tried making rules for the band, like, when you're working, there's no drinking and no drugs, recalled Kerry King. And we laughed at him and told him to fuck off. He was trying to micromanage stuff that had nothing to do with him. And Mr. Sales himself has nice things to say. But despite that, he said the difference is that kids that came out to see Slayer loved Slayer to the exclusion of almost everyone else. The kids would chant, "Slayer, Slayer," from the time the doors opened to the time that Blackie Lawless finished. Some fans stuck around to torture Lawless. And then they started showing up with "Wasp Sucks" banners. Lawless, not amused, took it out on the opening bands. I learned a lot of things from a lot of people over the years, said King. Probably the most that sticks with me is playing with Wasp and learning how not to be a dick. Blackie Lawless treated us like shit. He shot on us every chance he got. Can we have sound check? No. Can we have lights? No. Can we have smoke? No. Now, as far as like life on the road, Mr. Ferris notes that, on the tour bus, they are listening to West Coast hardcore like DRI and Verbal Abuse, while their fill-in drummer, Mr. Scaglione, pushed East Coast bands like Agnostic Front and Bad Brains. Motorhead was common ground. Scaglione rekindled Henneman's interest in Black Sabbath, and the fill-in drummer left a mark on Slayer's sound. He helped spark the final dimension Slayer would add before forever locking down its formula, the crawling, Sabbath-inspired sludge that oozed into Seasons in the Abyss. One afternoon, the tour bus stopped at a mall, and Scaglione bought Sabbath Bloody Sabbath on tape. Henneman borrowed it, and Scaglione never saw it again. The author notes that metal was becoming a more violent experience, sort of on a Slayer and hardcore end of things, but it was expanding in other directions too. Spurred by Crew, Metallica, Bon Jovi, hard rock, and metal were exploding as popular genres. Like Lawless, hard and heavy bands all over the country tried to figure out how they could squeeze a paycheck out of the phenomenon. Glam bands got glammier, and even speed metal bands started writing power ballads with acoustic touches. Slayer didn't hear the siren song of cash. We would joke, says Rick Sales. We would be in the dressing room or backstage, and somebody would say, "Did you hear the latest so-and-so album? That really sold a lot of copies." And I'd say, "You can do the same. Just write a love song," which was the joke. Inside, Lombardo wasn't laughing. He thought the band could write something accessible but retain their edge. Funny that they would do that on an album without Dave Lombardo, Diabolos in Musica. Not that they had like a hit, but they did, you know what they did. But that little bit there is interesting to me because I personally love the darker side of Slayer that kind of came out of South of Heaven and Seasons in the Abyss, especially, your Dead Skin Masks, stuff like that, really creepy, crawly stuff as well. Marrying that with the hyperactive, fast, double kick thrash stuff, I think that is the perfect formula.
Do ya?
Thank
God.
More albums worth of like speedy stuff without that Sabbath influence would not have served them as well, and I don't think they would have lasted as long.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. Someone tell Slayer about what Jay thinks. And while someone relays that message to the surviving members of Slayer about what Jay thinks of their legacy, let's have a long involved infomercial about Radish Mattress and what it's doing for the environment and how you can help support Radish Mattress. Oh, we don't have time for that? We're just going to get another Slayer segment? Okay, fine. I'm being told there's no time for more sponsor segments, so we're going to talk about Slayer for another minute.
Now, Minor Threat had a song called Guilty of Being White. And at the time, it was, Ian MacKay's observances from the point of view as a young white boy who was feeling targeted because of his race. And years later, Slayer would cover it on Undisputed Attitude, their punk covers record that came out in the mid-90s. The author of Slayer, the Jeff and Dave years, talks about how Kerry King, when he was a teenager, went to, I guess, it was a Gage Junior High, Henry T. Gage Junior High, and there was a sort of ritualized sort of beating on its way towards you, known as the Surfer Stomp, from some Latino students that would target white kids with long hair and, jump them, gang up on them. And he had a couple of scary moments where he, barely escaped with his personal well-being intact. 20 years after that, Slayer collectively agreed, says Mr. Ferris in the book, the full-throttle Guilty of Being White was a good choice for a cover. Araya, a full-blooded Chilean, made a controversial change to MacKay's defensive lyrics. Having grown up in America, Araya experienced a polarizing phenomenon. In much of the country, after generations of slavery and segregation, you were classified as either black or white. And when it was time for arbitrary ethnic classification, Latinos and Chileans generally weren't considered black as long as true equal rights weren't on the line. At the end of Guilty, Araya modified the lyrics from a defensive guilty of being white to an aggressive guilty of being right. The guy who wrote the song didn't care for Slayer's interpretation. It's so offensive to me, Mackay commented on Stephen Blush's Punk History American Hardcore, as referenced earlier. Araya would later explain that he meant right as in the ideas and sentiments expressed in Ian Mackay's song are correct. That's the quote. But the damage was done. I think Ian should relax and have fun, Hanneman told Kerrang. The band thrashed up another Minor Threat cover, Filler. Araya screams Mackay's lyrics. Is it really worth it? She cost you your life. She'll never leave your side. She's going to be your wife. King told me the song choice wasn't a jab at Lombardo. And that's plausible. It also features the modified line, you're full of religion, you're full of shit. Now, funner note to end this segment on is the band also covered a song, let's see, by TSOL. They covered Superficial Love.
And here's the part where Jay forgot to mention the songwriter.
He was happy for the payday that they got as a result. He says he bought a trampoline with the royalties, check, spray painted a big white pentagram, and then the Slayer logo on the big old bouncy black surface. And that's all for now, folks. It does feel good to have done a new episode. And to have done a ton of research to learn new things. I hope you're doing stuff out there that makes you happy. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to have a good time. You deserve to be able to do creative, fun things that spark new inspiration in you. I hope you never forget that. Please share the show with somebody that you think might like it, someone that's as weird as you are. I hope it can grow a little bit here and there. I just hope people have a good time listening to it. It's different every time. And next episode, I'm torn between two different choices. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I might finally pay off all the research I did on Graham Parsons and do my Grand Theft Parsons review. And I might do the Alice in Chains episode from Singles, because it's been years since my last Singles episode, and I've got more to talk about there. And I'm doing a tribute show in 2 days in Seattle at the Neptune Theater with a lot of my fellow local music compatriots, where I'm lucky enough to be able to play harmonica on Don't Follow by Alice in Chains. And it's a whole big old fundraising night for addiction recovery services. And I don't know, it's going to be a blast like it always is. Anyway, don't ever forget that rock and roll is the best. And so are you. Sweet dreams, everyone.